Tim Larkin is a New York Times best-selling author. His book When Violence is the Answer is one of the best books I've read on the topic. I was thrilled when Tim agreed to do this podcast with me, as I'd been following his work for a long time, and it was great to hear his thoughts on some of the most controversial topics regarding self-protection. This episode is a must for anyone who trains, teaches, or has an interest in the use of violence for self-protection. Evil thrives when good men and women do nothing, when they fail to make a stand. This podcast is about giving you the tools and the information to make that stand. I'm Ron Engelman, Master Sergeant, Krav Maga Black Belt, IDF combat veteran, proud Jew, and grandson to Holocaust survivors. This is the Ron Engelman Podcast. I first came across your work. I think it was online. You put on a video of some trained MMA fighters who got into an altercation in Brazil. I think it was in a gas station. You remember something like that?
Yes. Yeah, that was a very popular one that I put out, and it's interesting. It's interesting to see people's responses to things like that. Some people saw it as a criticism of MMA. Other people go the other side, that were saying, "Oh, see, MMA is worthless," and that really wasn't the point. The point of that particular video was the idea of you do what you train. And to me, the interesting part of that video was there was bad social behavior prior to this by the fighters. So they provoked a situation, which was interesting. They had tremendous confidence they were both, one was an up and coming fighter, one was a much more seasoned fighter, but they had a lot of experience in the ring, which I show in the video. They're very competent in the ring. And they used that same approach to deal with the situation. They basically, for those that haven't seen it, I'll quickly explain it. Two fighters were in a gas station, buying, a couple of, I think, a drink or something like that. They had an interaction with two girls, and one of the fighters was a little flippant with the girl, actually put his hands on her and kind of pushed her. And I don't know, you can't tell what the words exchanged were, but obviously it probably wasn't good. This had the girls go outside, and they had a group of guys out there, and they obviously told them what happened. And then those guys came into the little store at the gas station, and that's where the confrontation starts. And what I was trying to show to people, I go, wow, it's really interesting. Look, they're using the same type of tactics they use in the ring. They got right in the guys' faces right away, kind of like, two fighters facing off when they're doing like the weigh-ins or something. They used that. But what was interesting was once it got out, it then goes out into the where the cars are and the gas, filling up with gas. They get into that area. And that's when the actual confrontations start. And what was interesting was each fighter used their same methodology that they used in the ring, which is very single focused. The situational awareness really wasn't there. They weren't looking around to see what was going on. And one fighter, his situational awareness was so off that somebody was able to literally run up right behind him with a 2x4 and hit him in the back of the head, putting him into a coma. He was then kicked repeatedly on the ground. The other fighter was interesting. You could tell he had never trained to have anybody come at him with a impact weapon, because he gave distance. He actually backed up and made it much easier for the individual to hit him. And you could tell he was out of sorts. You could just tell that was a profile he had not seen before, the way he did it. And so my point in putting it out there is that, if all you do is train in a situation where there are some sort of rules, and you try to bring that out into the real world, you just have to be aware that there's going to be problems with that. And it's not limited to guys like in the MMA. I have military personnel that same thing. They love competition, combat sports, and they're fantastic at it. but sometimes they bring it onto the battlefield and they've had really horrible results from doing that. And mainly what it comes down to is not that the practitioners are inefficient in any way, shape, or form, or they're lacking in some sort. They're usually very fit individuals. They're usually very competent in what they do. It's the methodologies. It's just the idea that, when you're going up against, you have to, I think the assumption that I always make, and I think I had this in my last discussion with you, the assumption I always make when I'm training a client is that you're always going to be facing multiple attackers. Those attackers are going to be bigger, faster, and stronger, and those attackers are going to have weapons. And when you put that into the mix, there's other things you have to be aware of than just the one person in front of you. And that was the whole point of that video. And it, for the most part, the vast majority of people seeing the video got my message and agreed with it. And many of them from the MMA community were very, very complimentary about it. Because my goal is not to, I think there's too much in this world where, it's like my karate is better than your kung fu and all that kind of stuff, and that's not the idea. I mean, the idea for me is, I think people have to understand the difference between the gamification of violence, which we see in the combat sport world, which is fantastic, and then the reality of violence, where there's none of that. There's none of those things that make combat sports so great. And one is much easier. The skill sets of destruction are much easier for people to utilize than the skill sets of the combat sports. And to me, that's always just been a very interesting issue that very few people seem to talk about, because it's uncomfortable. I mean, I'm the first one to say that for all my years of training, I mean, I'm almost in my third decade now of doing this professionally. If I walk out the door and I catch a pipe to the back of the head, I go down just like everybody else. I have no, the one thing I've learned after all these years is using my skill set is only applicable if I'm the one doing the violence. If I'm the one using it, that's great. But if it's being done on me, I'm just as susceptible to it as anybody else. And I think that's just a reality we'll all have to come to and realize that there's there's this idea that, I mean, some of the comments that I would get on that particular video that you're talking about were just ridiculous. It was like, it was like people not wanting to realize that there's vulnerabilities.
Yeah. Well, I think it's only natural, and it's something that you see quite a bit. It comes more from, I'd say, the inexperienced, or it's a parallel kind of like to self-defense. The people who are confident with violence are the ones who least often have to use it. And the same kind of analogy goes that it's often at the, call it blue belt level or whatnot. Those are the people who are like, my Krav Maga, my Jiu Jitsu, everything else is bullshit. It's only kickboxing, only kung fu, whatever. And when you go up to the higher levels, and high level is not always the instructor level or the black belt level, but you go to somebody who's, really honed their craft and has really tested their craft and is confident in that. You only arrive at one point, and I don't care if you're doing Krav Maga, if you're doing Jiu Jitsu, if you're doing boxing, if you're really confident enough to open your eyes, what's the saying? You know how much you don't know. And at the highest levels, I've found the highest levels is Jiu-Jitsu, black belts. I've got friends who are world champions, and they're very aware of where, let's say, the benefits of their training is, and where the problems are. And obviously the same thing in Krav Maga. And we're very aware of what we do well and where we're good at. And the more experience you have, you can also see, I don't want to say problems. Maybe the word I'm looking for is challenges that that needs to be addressing. For me, that's the beauty of. I'm a Krav Maga instructor. I trained extensively in boxing. I love jiu-jitsu, any form of combat. And I'm an active paratrooper.
Right.
But the more you get into it, you see where, okay, there are places here that need to improve. And as Krav Maga, it was designed to be an adaptive system, meaning that the Krav Maga that we train nowadays is different from what it was founded by Imi Lichtenfeld, who was the founder of Krav Maga. And it was different from when I was a kid and I was training it. And that's a very good thing. The fundamentals don't change, but the techniques and the training methods, all the time they're adapted and they become better. It would be a very sad thing if it wasn't, or it wouldn't meet the challenges of reality. So all the time we get better. And it goes very much to what you're talking about, that, can anybody argue that mixed martial arts training is effective? The question would be for what? But it makes you tough, it makes you strong, it makes you able to combat violence, certainly, but what type of violence? And that's the question that we all the time need to be asking. I think you addressed that phenomenally in your work in that video as well.
Well, yeah, that you touched on something that's it's kind of a big point of mine. Like, I really don't participate in the turf wars that you find in like reality self-defense or MMA or any of that stuff. What I'm more concerned about is exactly what you talked about. I think too many people don't understand the like the incident that you talked about that I showed the MMA guys there. The real point there was all that was avoidable. Like they willingly participated in that, and then it got horribly out of control for them. Both of them ended up severely injured over something that was absolutely unnecessary. And that's the stuff where I think sometimes, and especially you put it really, really aptly when you said that blue belt level. I think that's probably the big danger area. That's where you get so enamored in your whatever your system is at that point, that you kind of lose focus on reality sometimes, and you get very parochial in saying that this way is the best way, and we can do that. My whole thing is the same thing. You said fundamentals, I say principles. They're basically the same thing. Those are always rock solid. But if you're not improving your methods and your delivery and the way it goes over the years, you're not evolving. And I tell people all the time, and I'm sure you feel this way with how you're teaching right now, that I wish I was learning the way my new students are learning. I wish I started where I'm starting people off now, because I had to go at such a crisscross road, to get to where we're at right now. And I truly feel the methods and principles that we teach, particularly right now, are really great. I can't wait to see what the next generation does. And So I absolutely agree with you on that. And that's the real, I think when you get past the idea of, when you get past the, I don't want to say juvenile, but when you get past the basics of being able to take care of yourself, and then you're proud of that, you're proud of your training, you're proud of all that, I think then reality sets in. I think after you've done it long enough, I think Bruce Lee had that saying where, you come full circle to, like, all of a sudden a punch becomes a punch again and a kick becomes a kick. And I think what we do is we get to the point to where you get very comfortable with the subject. You get very, adept at it, but you also realize the limitations, and you also realize, the realities of using the information and when it would ever be appropriate to use it. And I think that's it. My goal when I'm reaching out to people, when I'm writing books, is not to try to get them to come train with me. My goal is to sit there and put out, ideas that, hey, an awful lot of what people get involved in out there is completely avoidable. And it really just comes down to just changing your behaviors and recognizing cues that you're probably not paying attention to.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I had a very I'd say like awakening at some point in terms of my training, where traditional martial arts training, and I think it's pretty much the same different places that you go. It's you're training to defeat an opponent. That's not a bad thing within itself, but it's very different from training to I don't even like to call it training to survive, because I ask my students, what's the goal of Krav Maga? And they say to survive. I'm like, I hate to break it to you, we're all going to die at some point. Like that's a losing battle. There's no, right. It's not to survive. If you only look at what's the goal of boxing, it's okay to knock out your opponent, to win on points. What's the goal of wrestling? To pin down your opponent. In jiu-jitsu, to tap them out, or to, you know, to score more points, and so on. What's the goal of self-defense? And it took me a long time to kind of break it down. And the best I've come is to disengage. That's, at the end of the day, what you want to do. You want to get the person off of you, or if you're there, you know, protecting other people, if you're there with your family, you want to get them, and you want to get out of that situation. That's training for something very different than the way I was originally taught Krav Maga, and the way most martial arts are trained, which is that you need to defeat your opponent. That's the only way you get out of this fight. And this once you're able to separate with the ego, and you speak about it a lot, there's some situations where I'm simply not going to be able to win. And it doesn't matter. I may have the best techniques, and maybe I climbed, you know, I'm being a bit cynical, but, you know, I climbed the right mountain and found the Chinese master with the long white beard, and you know, I trained Kill Bill style or whatnot. But some situations are just not, it's just not viable. But when you start looking at it, okay, I need to be able to escape this scenario, this becomes much more realistic, let's say.
No. Yeah. And my goal, what I found is most people, when they say, why are you training self-defense? What's the goal of self-defense training? You know, I'm just using that as a general term. They'll give a variety of reasons. And really what I've learned is the vast majority of people, there are people like ourselves who like to take it to the level of, you know, instructor, master, and do that. But that's really, when you really look at, that's just a small group of people that really want to go that level. And especially when you look even on the combat sports side, the people that actually do professional fighting and, you know, high level fighting, that's a very, very small group of the aggregate that actually trains. And what you realize after a while is the majority of people that I've found, even though they may not articulate it this way, what they really want to learn is they want to learn, how do I live a life that minimizes the chance that I'll ever need self-defense? And it took me a long time to mature as an instructor to get to that level and realize, oh, you know, I mean, you know how it is. I mean, because you get the military background. When you're around military all the time, law enforcement, you know, and the special units, and you're training in that world, which was my world for a long time, and private military contractors. I mean, it's just alpha, and you're just about, you know, doing the job and getting into it and taking out. When you get back into the general public and you start working with people, and then you realize, well, you know, these people aren't living that type of lifestyle. These people are actually trying to have good lives for the most part. And they want to, you know, what can I do as an instructor? What's one of the greatest things I can do for somebody? Well, I can give them some information that will help them avoid the avoidable, you know? And I think that's just, there's so many things like the situation that, you know, we go back to that MMA thing. It all started with an interaction where the guy was really rude to the girl. I mean, very rude, to the point to where he put his hands on. And whatever escalated to get at that point, you know, there were 2 or 3 opportunities to disengage, either apologize or just, you know, not even get to that point. And yet neither side, you know, did that. And to me, that's the more important training like that. It's not that I don't still love the training, because, you know, if you need the information, you have to be very clear with your people. I mean, you have to train them exactly like, if somebody needs to, I lay out the idea that, you know, violence is rarely the answer, but when it is, it's the only answer. And that second part is the most important part, because if you do need to use the tool, you have to know how to use it, because it truly is, you know, under the parameters that I set up for people, they would be devoid of choice, meaning I'm very clear. The only time to use violence from you know, the way I put the information out, and most sane people, you know, agree with this, is that you're completely devoid of choice. Meaning, if you had an out, you would have left. If you could have apologized, used your social skills, you would have. None of those are available, and now you're facing imminent grievous bodily harm. And so the only thing that's going to get you out of that situation is to be able to protect yourself and use your skill set. And to that end, it has to be very, you know, straightforward and brutal. I'll have people come in, new people usually, who have fantasies about what they think they're going to learn. And yeah, hey, teach me this, teach me that. And so usually what I'll do is I'll show them something very quickly, very simple, straightforward, that absolutely destroys the human body, to the point to where most of the time it'll be lethal. But it's deceptively easy, meaning anybody can do it, just simple strikes that you put them together and you show, very quickly, what the result is. And most of them quickly back up. Oh, I don't want to kill him. I don't want to kill him. And it's like, well, you don't have that choice. It's funny. Tragedy happened here in the States. We had a young hockey coach. He's mid 40s, but he's a girls hockey coach in here in Minnesota. Really just well-loved guy of the community. For some reason, he was at a bar, which is, not necessarily a big deal, but there was a guy at the bar that was just completely agitated. It seemed that he was resistant against some of the COVID. COVID's been really, I'm sure you guys have seen it too, that mentally it's really affected a lot of people. And this guy was at the bar. I guess he was being belligerent. He had exchange with this guy in the bathroom, and it kept to the point, and the guy kept his cool. He didn't say anything to this guy until the end, as they're leaving, and they both happen to be walking out of the bar at the time, and the hockey coach just couldn't help it. He told the guy his behavior basically was just reprehensible or whatever, but and it gave that guy that reason. They got into it. He got one punch off. The other guy got one punch off, hit the hockey coach, knocked him down a flight of stairs and killed him on there, right off of that. Completely avoid, and so I'm going to be doing a little video on that and telling people, you don't win bar fights. You just, the way you win is you don't participate. And because once you use the tool, I'm sure that that other guy had no intention of killing that individual. I'm sure he was just so enraged, he just wanted to shut him up. That's why a lot of times people headhunt, because it's really a social thing. When you see people punching the head all the time, they're really trying to shut the other person up. Literally, like they don't want them to communicate anymore. It's really it's not like watching an alpha predator where you see like some of the prison killings and stuff where they're just going after the body. It has nothing to do with social. They're just literally shutting down the body. This was a completely avoidable situation. And I see clients of mine will tell stories oftentimes. And it usually is a story like that where they want to talk about the end result and how they could have undone, how they could have done better or done the other thing, versus all the opportunities they had prior to this to not even get involved with it.
People often think that, let's say people without a lot of experience, they think that, okay, if they were in a situation, they'd know what to say or they'd be able to diffuse it, or if they're maybe a bit more on the alpha side, they'll be able to intimidate their opponent. The fact of the matter is, when you're under threat of getting hurt or worse, or getting killed, your heart races so quickly and your flight responses kick in that any ability to communicate or even to put together complete sentences is just not there. It's non-existent, let alone even if you were able to somehow, bring some logic argument why you should not be attacked, the other person's also already so worked up that they wouldn't even comprehend it. We're way beyond language skills, and it's really down, if there's any communication, it's down to the body language, very, very gross body language abilities. And over there are opportunities to, let's say, to de-escalate, to lower the energies. But at some point, when someone's made a decision that they're going to attack you, and that's often a problem in self-defense, because the people that we train, which we'd like to assume that they're not people that are going out there looking for fights. They're not people who want to be engaged in violence. It's an assumption. It's not, and from years and years of teaching, I can say that is pretty much the rule. There are exceptions to the rule, but that is pretty much the rule. But the problem here, and I think you talk about it very good in your book, When Violence is the Answer, is that we talk about it as the switch in Krav Maga, where you need to know, or you need to be able to recognize when that's it, the time for talking is over.
Yep.
And if you don't take action right now, things are going to be very bad for you. It's about being able to recognize and understanding not just the, let's say, the tools or the mechanics of self-defense, of being able to punch, being able to block and whatnot, but also the awareness of going, the temporal awareness of going, okay, right now I need to punch this individual, or I need to grab something and hit him with them right now, or else my chances are zero. And that's especially if you're, like you said, when you're dealing with somebody who's bigger than you, you're dealing with a group, you may be dealing with somebody who's affected by some drugs or things that it's going to be a really, really bad day for you if you don't do anything.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's that's the part. Is everybody loves the avoidance side of things. Where they have a real problem is what you're talking about, when violence is imminent and you have to act. And that's, if you have those clear delineations, it's much easier to act. I mean, the one thing that I think people have told me that have gone through, either they've read about my methods or they've gone through some training, they appreciate the fact that if they've had to take action, it wasn't a question. There was no question in their mind that they had to act. They immediately saw what the situation was. There was no hesitation. And I think when people hesitate, to use violence, that usually tells you it's not the time. There's usually, and that's the funny part about it is you want to use violence, or you think you need to use violence because the social situation is getting really uncomfortable, and yet you still have choice. And they're still there, and you don't, you're almost looking for permission to do it in some ways, and from a social ego standpoint. And when you can get past that, you've really, I think that's probably the big crucible for all of us, is that we have to get past the idea of wanting to use the information and understanding when we need to use the information, and
it's something
conduct themselves that way.
Sorry, it's something that's always been kind of, it's always been kind of the foundations of, like, ever since I was a kid learning Krav Maga, we always understood that Krav Maga, and we always said that's what was always drilled into us. I'm talking about, I training Krav Maga like as an 8-year-old, 10-year-old, even when it's not really self-defense. You don't learn self-defense when you're 8, 10 years old.
Right.
You learn values. You learn a moral code. You learn how to be a good functioning. There's so much value in martial arts training is for kids, but it's not, you're not learning how to disarm a terrorist when you're 10 years old. That's not going to fucking
right.
Like that. Right. That's not viable. I can teach you the technique, but your ability to do it is zero. It's just not going to happen. But
it's funny you say that, because that's such a key point. Children get such value out of martial arts, but the value that they get, some parents just have this idea that somehow their kid's going to be able to protect themselves against a real predator, and it's just ridiculous. It's just not. I mean, they show get
confidence.
The
they get confidence. It's not
absolutely.
It's not the techniques. It's not the techniques that they get. Like I've had adults come in and go, okay, I want my kid to do Krav Maga because I've read it. It's what the Israeli commandos do, and yada yada. And I'm like, really? That's what you think your kid needs? You're looking to give them tools to that they use in the special forces. There's or it's seen as, I want the most brutal, the most effective fighting system for a kid. And I go, no.
And it's rarely somebody that's trained that's saying that. Like, it's usually an untrained parent which has this fantasy. And I understand they're scared for their kid, and they think this is going to make their kid into some sort of a superhuman to do it that way. They don't understand really what you're asking. And they also don't understand the realities of the situation. I wrote a blog years ago, and it basically, the idea was, if you look at the animal kingdom, a baby lion is not expected to fight off the hyena. You can train, they train everything. They train them how to be a predator and do all this stuff. They're going through their training modes, but they don't have the physical abilities to actually fend off, or the acumen to fend off, a pack of hyenas. That's what, the lion, the pride is all about, and all the parents. And that's really it with your child. I mean, it's our responsibility as much as I'm a dad of 4 kids. I have an older son, but I have 3 small kids. I have a 10-year-old and then twin daughters that are 7. And it's a reality for me every day that I have to realize. Now I have them doing basic martial arts training. I have them doing a really good Jiu Jitsu school and everything. And the reason I'm having them do that is they're doing gymnastics and Jiu Jitsu and everything. But it's really, I'm choosing the coaches, because they lay a good moral foundation. They are learning discipline. They are learning a work ethic, and they're also getting some really good physical skill sets that will help them the rest of their life. I have no illusions that they're going to be able to protect themselves in the way that you and I are talking about.
Well, exactly. Look, as I said, I've been, I've been training hard since I was a kid, and that did help. In terms of being bullied, it's not that knowing techniques is going to help you. On the contrary, sometimes actually, if you have a reputation to having skills and ability, sometimes you're the one who's going to get singled out. What a child that's being bullied needs is not, self-defense training, especially at those ages where, the growth difference between 14-year-olds, right? Some 14-year-olds are the size of adults, and others are tiny. And it's not that, and it's the tiny ones that get picked on, right? And if you say, I'll go to your local karate school or your local jiu-jitsu school or Krav Maga school, and you learn techniques and you'll be able to fight back, you're not just you're setting unrealistic expectations. And then when they fail, they're going to feel even more of a failure. So that's not really what you should be looking at. As you said, you look at the coach. You look at the coach that's going to give good values, that's going to be a good role model. You look at the group also. You make them fun. I mean, what a kid that's being bullied and being singled out needs, they need a pack. They need alliance pack, as you say. Exactly. And if they can find that in the local jiu-jitsu gym, and they feel like, they're part of a brotherhood and a sisterhood, that's exactly what they need. They need that confidence and not the self-defense techniques.
Yeah, and they're welcome there and stuff. So it's great. And what's nice is I know that the foundation is laid so that when they are at the appropriate age, I can start introducing, a little bit of what we do now. But I'm also a big one that I truly feel the type of training that you do and I do, people find you. You can't. I laugh all the time. I say, I've been doing this, like I said, almost 3 decades now, and I've only had 2 friends take it to an instructor level, all these years. And these are friends of mine that literally, like, I've extended training to friends and family, but no family members, and only 2 people. And that's me. I'm a guy that gets called all, to do all these speaking engagements all over the world. I write books, all this stuff. And, it's either it's something that you seek out and you want, or it's not. I've learned not to try to, I try not to be like an evangelist. But if somebody does show interest in there, then yes, I'll have them come in. But I think it's weird. It's that I used to think everybody wanted this, that's the naive thing you think, especially as a new instructor. Oh, let me tell you, you try to get, and you quickly realize, no, that's not. A lot of people, the subject itself is just too much for them.
Well, that's a paradox, and that's something I've been wanting to ask you, because look, you, I, and maybe a good proportion of the people listening to this, and certainly the instructors that I train, like we're the 1 percentile, right? Most people who walk into a Krav Maga gym, a self-defense gym, a Jiu-Jitsu gym, they're not going to become black belts. They're not going to become instructors. And and if you're running a business and you're running a school, 99% of your clients they're going to be different from you. Like I personally enjoy getting punched in the face. I love getting punched in the face, and I really enjoy punching other people in the face. I like choking other people unconsciously. Like it's something that I find fun. Most of the human population, unless they've been conditioned to it and doing it for years, getting punched in the face is not fun for them. And then you can go even farther. Okay, so if you're a good instructor, what you do is you gradually condition people. And at the beginning, like anything, at the beginning, really, really hard, strenuous exercise is not fun. Like if you walked into a CrossFit gym, and you've never done something similar, and you don't have any military background, your first CrossFit session is going to be torture. And then after a while, it's still torture, but it's torture that you enjoy.
Exactly. You make that switch.
Now, there's some people who are never going to enjoy that. And that's kind of, I find, the paradox of self-defense training. It's certainly something I've found in when I'm doing women's self-defense workshops and things like that. But in general, it's the people, how can I put it? The people who need martial arts training the most are the people who are going to be the least likely to enjoy it and to want to stick to it. And even if you make it very and you should, if you make it very approachable and you make a very gradual descent from day one, which is you're learning how to stand and how to do basic maneuvers or whatnot, and even just trying to orientate yourself up until when you're full contact sparring against the black belts. There's it shouldn't be day one and then day three in a proper school. But even then, there's some people who simply, they're not going to enjoy full contact training. They're not going to enjoy training, the physical aspect of training really, really hard until your body says, look, I'm not enjoying this. Stop what you're doing. So I guess how do we deal with this problem of the people who need this training the most? It's something that maybe they'll be willing to do for a 2-hour, 3-hour workshop. But if you go, if you go to somebody, if I go to, a friend of mine and I ask her, how concerned are you for your personal safety? And she might say, okay, I'm quite concerned. There've been some recent, sexual assaults here, and I really want to have these skills. I'm worried for me. I'm worried for my daughter. I'm like, okay, how serious are you about getting the tools? They'll say, I'm very serious. I say, okay, what about, training for 6 months, twice a week, for an hour and a half every day? They're like, no way, I'm doing that. And even if they'd come to about 2 weeks and they'd say, I don't enjoy this. It's not something that I can stick with.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've come to that reality a long time ago. And, I think the way you get through to people like that, believe it or not, is what we're doing right now. People hear pieces of content that all of a sudden resonate with them. People that never would have trained before. It's been really interesting since I've been putting out information and books. One of the nice things, we've had all sorts of challenges with, big tech and the internet and everything. But one of the nicer things is it's a great way to distribute information. Anything that you have an interest in, you can usually find some subject matter expert that's out there putting out information that's interesting. And what I found is the way you and I are talking right now, even though it's very normal for us, because it's how we're talking to people, most people that know nothing about, Krav or martial arts or self-defense, they have assumptions that it's something else. And now they hear you speak and they go, oh, wait a minute, this is, I'd actually be welcome in here. I could actually learn something in here. I'm actually, there's something for me there, and it triggers. Now, listen, you're not going to get everybody, but it's surprising how many people you will get, because just think what it takes right now for somebody, an uninitiated person, I'm going to say any of the instructors out there, think what it takes right now for anybody to just walk into your gym, just walk into your training center and stuff, just to walk in, that it's almost, I don't want to overdo it, but it's almost an act of bravery for some people, because
I'm with you 100% on this. 100%.
They're making a huge, they're making all these assumptions that, oh my God, they're not going to treat me nice. They're going to, I'm not going to be welcome. They have all these weird things in their head, So to me, when that person comes in, to this day, my favorite course still to teach is my initial course, where the new people are there and just seeing things go off and having people realize, oh, it's not what I thought it was. It's actually there are things I can do. There are ways I can do this. And oh, it doesn't have to become a lifestyle for me. I can actually learn some really good skill sets and, but I don't have to become a professional. I don't have to become, they think they have to become this superhuman and take it to the levels that, people like us take it to. And when they learn that, no, you can actually put some quality time in, nothing overly, oppressive, and walk away with some really good skill sets. And then they kind of surprise themselves. I'm always surprised because then there are some of those people that end up doing what we do. They came in reluctant and then they really liked it. And then they became excellent instructors, and they were there. But I think we in the industry have to understand that it's a huge barrier to get people even to come in and check us out, and so I try to do it. I try to do it through, like talks like this and, writing something just kind of in general, things that I know people are concerned about. And, I think they're very surprised that our answer isn't always, kill them all, let God sort them out. Because I think a lot of times they think you have to be a hardcore fighter to learn self-protection.
Yeah. It's about, I think that's something that is done quite well in a lot of the, let's say, I'd say it's a different type of person who comes to learn self-defense that comes to learn, let's say, boxing. I'm not talking about fitness boxing. I'm talking about, competitive boxing or, even Greco-Roman wrestling. It's a very different type of person who comes in for self-defense. It's simply not the same crowd. And I would dare say that our goal is, everybody takes it to the level where they want to take it. Some people are going to come and they're going to do maybe 3 months worth of training, and that's all they do in their entire life. And as an instructor, you need to make sure that they get value from that. They're just as a credible client. Let's say you have just as much of a duty and responsibility to them as you do for somebody who's going to stay with you for 10 years and get their black belt. And the fact of the matter is, there are going to be more of those that come in for 3 months than that stay for 10 years, just because of the way, the way life works. And that's something that Krav Maga, I mean, it was specifically designed for soldiers, and people often think that if somebody's special forces, somebody who was in the Navy SEALs, they must be Steven Seagal, because that's what we grew up on, right? Under Siege, that every Navy SEAL is a hand-to-hand combat expert. And I've trained a lot of them around the world, in Israel and Australia, in the US, and it depends. And I know I'm going to get clobbered for this, but I would dare say that, the average special forces warfighter has, let's say, best case scenario, if they didn't have any, they didn't do it as a hobby outside, maybe the level of somebody who's been training in a good martial arts gym for maybe about 6 months, maybe a bit more. And that's perfectly fine. By the way, as a military hand-to-hand combat instructor, as a Krav Maga instructor for the Israeli army, I recognize that hand-to-hand combat is certainly an important part of the toolkit, but it's not the most important part of the toolkit, and it's certainly not what they're going to devote hours and hours on doing. It's really about same thing. People think, oh, well, if somebody was a bouncer and they've been in 500 fights outside of the club, I don't see that as a benefit. I don't want to be trained by somebody who's really, really good at getting themselves into fights. I want to be trained by somebody who knows how to avoid fights. I want to be trained by somebody who can disengage, who can de-escalate, and then, if necessary, on the very, very rare occasions, finish it without even it becoming a fight. And
and that's the higher skill set when you get to that point. They put unrealistic expectations on people that they think, like, especially in the special operations community. And they're amazing operators. I mean, as we know, I'm sure you've been some incredible operators. I mean, just the one thing I've always found in the military is you meet like the top 5% that you meet in the military, you don't meet anywhere else in your life. It's really crazy. It's like the discipline, the ability, the efficacy, everything. I found some of the greatest people in the military. And as my dad used to say, he goes, you meet the top 5%. He goes, but then he goes, unfortunately, the bottom 20% are going to keep you so busy, you don't get to hang out with the top 5 that much. So, we used to joke about that, but you're right. I mean, and people think that's like somehow like why anybody would think that's a denigration is crazy, because it's not. There's so many other skill sets you have to learn in the military, especially in special operations community, that you cannot afford to solely focus on one area like that. And primarily you want to make sure that whatever you're training also translates to the rest of your kit, that it's actually synergistic, and not antithetical to what you're actually going to be out doing.
That's another issue. I guess the other side of it is, if you're a bloke and you're physical, you're very fit. It's also natural that, let's say, your hobby, you wouldn't be surprised if it's not necessarily a job requirement, but it wouldn't be surprising if your hobbies as a, let's say, I don't like to say soldier, because there's soldiers and then there are war fighters, right?
Right.
So if you're one of the few war fighters, it's not surprising that your hobbies might include boxing, Jiu Jitsu, Krav Maga, and whatnot. But then you also got to ask yourself, let's say maybe we come full circle in terms of the applicability of these skills. For example, sometimes we have, this is a problem we face sometimes in the Israeli army. You might have a kid who's this karate phenomenon, right? His dad was a karate instructor, his grandfather was a Krav Maga instructor, and him, before even joining the army at age 18, he's already a black belt with who knows how many dans, and he's been living, breathing karate, whatever. And now he joins the Israeli army, and they go, you know what, you've got the skill set. We'd like to allocate you to become a hand-to-hand combat instructor or Krav Maga instructor, because that's what we do. What we do in the Israeli army. And you take this kid who's been training karate for his whole life, and you put him through a Krav Maga instructor course, which is, let's say, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever it is, very, very intensive course. And then you send him off to whatever unit. What do you think he's going to be teaching?
Yeah, he's going to default back.
He's going to be teaching somewhere in between of karate and Krav Maga. Things have changed, actually. Danny Netzer, who's a friend of mine, he's currently the head Krav Maga instructor for the Israeli army, and he has been for quite some years. And things have been changing where there's more oversight. But I say this because it's kind of the same thing. If you've got some dude in the unit who's a Brazilian Jiu Jitsu black belt, and that's what he lives in, and that's excellent. It's very lucky that unit should have something like that. When they're going out and they're doing the training, they're probably going to be doing what's available and what's around. And then the question is, how applicable is this skill set for operational? Where I guess the same thing would be, let's say, boxing. Right, there used to be a part. It's not as prevalent as it used to be, but in old school army, boxing was a part of the thing. People did boxing to become, like, competitive sport boxing, to become tough, to become strong. Right. But then, if I'm with an enemy in the field, and I'm in full kit and webbing, and I've got my rifle, and maybe I've got a sidearm and whatnot, maybe even a K-bar or whatever. You've got a knife. Like, the likelihood of me throwing a punch in an operational setting is not very high.
Well, yeah, and the other thing too, when you take into account there, like we always tell people, they go, these are to operate your tools. You get 27 bones in the hand, and you have to be very proficient to be able to use these as clubs, as an impact tool. There's other areas, especially in operational sense, you want to protect this. You need these. And so oftentimes what is preferable, say in a combat sport, isn't necessarily great operationally because you have other concerns. It's not like you can take 6 weeks off to hang out. You're going to be out in the field, and now you've got a boxer's fracture because you missed your target or you hit it incorrectly. And then does the movement that you're working translate to your kit, to your equipment? Do the same movement that you train, like our whole thing was, the reason we started doing our approach was, the idea was not to become necessarily proficient in hand to hand. It was almost to earn your kit back. If we got to the point to where a guy with his brain in his body, just in his underwear, feels that he can protect himself, to a certain level, the confidence level is there. And guess what? He gets that much better once you start giving him his kit back, because he doesn't feel like there's this idea, if you build up from the ground up with nothing and then give them tools, rather than start them out with a bunch of tools that we do this in the police all the time, to the point to where, give them very little training and they default to the gun each and every time because there's been terrible training. For a variety of reasons too. It's not the law enforcement community. A lot of times it has to do with the legal side of things. They actually prefer that, which is crazy to me. But what I found in the military was, when you train something like Krav, or you train something like, like my approach to things, it doesn't give them the competitive benefit they're looking for. It's not like, I'm not going to be the best BJJ guy here because I can choke everybody out in the platoon and stuff. There's that competitive spirit that military guys have all the time. And I think one of the biggest issues that I've had with military training is they treat hand-to-hand combat training as esprit de corps, a way to build, rather than a warfighting skill set. And it's controversial. And I catch, people take that wrong all the time for me. They think somehow I'm criticizing, a lot of, like, in the US military, they do a lot of competitive sport training. That's really what it is. It's combat sports. And what I can see is, normally, especially the proliferation of Brazilian Jiu Jitsu in the military is twofold for me. One, it's easy for them to compete with each other and not hurt each other too bad. There are those occasional accidents, so it's there, and you're not actually striking, which is good for the guys. But the real reason is, every time I ask people, I go, what was it about Brazilian Jiu Jitsu? Why did you feel you needed to learn that? And they usually, especially once the war started, you'd hear some version of, okay, so we captured all these guys, and then we had to cuff them, or we had to restrain them and put them down. And then 4 of us were on top of this one guy, and we couldn't control him. And, we're trying to, put him down and put the cuffs on. And then, like in the Navy, it'd be like, little senior chief so-and-so came up, who's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu expert, jumps up, spider monkeys on the guy and has him under control right away. Oh, we all got to learn this, which, yes, there's some great prisoner handling skills that you can utilize with jiu-jitsu. Absolutely. And I understand that, but then to say this needs to be our primary way of doing things, I go, well, how does it work with your kit? How does it work with your equipment? Are you going to do some of that stuff, when you're going to tie yourself up? And I think I might have talked to you last time, a buddy in Australian Special Forces, and he caught himself competing with a bad guy that just wanted to kill him. And he remembered, he put him in a Kimura, and he was pulling up, and he actually snapped the guy's, I think he snapped his elbow or his wrist, to where he broke up, and the guy kept coming. It wasn't anything else. And then JJ just reached up, grabbed his knife, and it was the first knife kill that Australian Special Forces had, like, prior to Vietnam on that. But his whole thought process was, he goes, I was competing. I wasn't trying to end the threat. He goes, I had my knife right here. This guy was trying to kill. I could see he was trying to get to a grenade. And my whole time was, oh, good, I got him in the Kimura now. And he goes, I realized I tied up all of my, my 2 arms were tied up doing this. And there were multiple threats in the room. And, you default to your training. And so to me, it's just trying to take in considerations like that. When you're training units like that, it's why would you, why would you try to fit a competition sports into a war situation or a a serious situation like that. You just have to be careful how you do it. But it falls on deaf ears. It really does, these days.
That's kind of the danger of martial arts training. And I don't think that I haven't seen many exceptions to the rule. Martial arts, any sort of combat or self-defense training, that often we fall into the trap of, and I think this is somewhat guided by ego, and everybody's got an ego, myself included. And what happens is you have some very specific techniques or skills that you want, techniques that you want to teach, and that's your bread and butter, and that's what works for you. And then what often we find ourselves doing is setting up the scenarios and the situations that cater, or more correctly, that our techniques would work exactly for that. Brazilian again, not to pick on Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I feel confident talking about, like, not picking, but because it's something that I really love and really enjoy, and I've got the utmost respect for it.
It's outstanding. I mean, it really is. I have a lot of top friends, that are top competitors. And that's the hard point. What you're about to say is, if you say what you're probably about to say, it seems like we're denigrating Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and you're not. That's just it. It's outstanding for what it is.
Yeah, but and it comes from the top, by the way, from the Gracies, that when you talk about gamifying, when you turn something into sport and you set it up with rules, and people somehow think that Krav Maga is so excellent because it doesn't have any rules. Rubbish. If you think that, like, going back to it, like, if you think that your answer for ground fighting is taking a finger and putting it through somebody's eye or biting somebody, yes, it's certainly an excellent tool. Try that next time you grapple against a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu purple belt. Even try to put your finger in his eye. Good luck with that, unless you've got extensive ground experience, because they know what they're doing on the ground. But the other side of the equation is that the competition side of it, when we start adapting, all of a sudden we build a competition, and where our techniques, we build, let's say, the testing ground in which our techniques work the best. And that's a problem, because it doesn't allow, our system develops towards our, let's say, test rather than towards the needs of reality. If it's a self-defense skill set that I'm teaching, then it's a problem. If it's a sport, it's not a problem. Nobody can criticize boxing and saying, well, boxing isn't the most effective thing for self-defense, whatever self-defense means, because that's not very, it is clear, but that's also argument. But nobody can argue whether, because that's not its purpose. Like, nobody can say, well, soccer is crap because it's not the most, or football, if you're in Europe or wherever, it's crap because it's not the most effective way of moving a ball from point A to point B. No, that's not the point. The point to play soccer or football is to be really good in that specific arena. But if your goal is not the system itself, but if it's a means to an end, which is disengaging or being able to protect yourself and your loved ones, the only benchmark that you need to test yourself against is whether it works in those specific situations and not the ones that you set up. And that's a very big problem of kind of structuring these little things. And nobody's like, it's not just jiu-jitsu. We do it in Krav Maga, we do it everywhere, where, in every martial art I've seen that, they set up this, I guess there's this other side, and this is something that I'm actually very, very keen to ask you about. You talk about very extensively about training to injure your opponent, and that's something that I can really connect to. Especially, I think it was after I mentioned earlier, it was something that I always I understood the concept, but I couldn't quite put it in words. And I think it was after reading some of your stuff, after reading some other very, very good thinkers in the field. It's this ability to separate between different sorts of violence, between the asocial violence, between the predatory violence, and to kind of have an understanding that self-defense the self-defense toolkit and the skill set that we're training on, it's not about when somebody looked at you funny in the bar. That's not
No.
what it's there for. In Israel, it's pretty easy because most of the violence that we deal with, there's not a lot of alcohol, there's not a lot of crime here in Israel. We do have terrorism. And over there, it's black and white. It's very easy, although it's not as simple as it used to be. But when we were training, it's simple. Somebody comes at you with a knife to kill you. You do whatever you need to survive. You pick up whatever you need to do. And if you need to kill them to survive the situation, so be it. By the way, it's not that simple anymore, because nowadays the person coming to attack you, it could be a 15-year-old who picked up a knife and is coming to start. It could be a girl, could be a teenager girl. So what are you going to do? You're going to kill them? The answer is not. It's not that simple. And no, like if somebody says, yeah, well, if somebody coming at me with a knife, I don't care if they're a 14-year-old girl, I'm still going to shoot them. Well, we don't see eye to eye, whoever says that.
Right.
Because no, the answer isn't always there. But I guess the leading into your injury, it's that the toolkit and the skill set that we teach in self-defense, it's designed when there is no other choice, and now you have to use everything, which may include lethal force, to end the circumstance, to end the situation.
Yeah, and it was kind of the big revelation in my training when I really realized. I mean, my whole story on how I got started, it was injury to the human body. I was weeks away from graduating SEAL training, and I was already going to the team I wanted to go to. I had everything set up, and then I had a diving accident, and here I was, this unstoppable, Bud's trainee that was, leading the pack and everything, and, just full of myself, very arrogant. And I was completely humbled by an injury to my ear. I had underwater, I blew my eardrum, and it went up into my middle ear and emptied out my semicircular canal. And I went into vertigo, and I lost all control of my body. It was incredible. And I got to the surface by just luck. And they said, I was just out of control. My head was slamming against the water. They pulled me up and everything. And that was the first time I'd been, throughout my life, I had been hurt. I hadn't even broken bones. I had stitches, tons of stitches and stuff like that. But I had never had a real true injury where I couldn't just gut it out. And what ended my career with the SEAL teams before it even started ended up being kind of the seminal thing for me that started me on my path this way, because that's the one thing that we start to learn is like, hey, there's areas of the human body that really can't take trauma, and they're really consistent. And where we get most of the data that we used is we tend to focus solely on sports injury data. And sports injury data is useful to us because all the injuries come from humans colliding with humans or humans colliding with the planet. And those are injuries that you and I can replicate, like talking about what happened to that hockey coach when he got hit. The initial strike took his balance, may have knocked him out. We don't know. But the fact that he was, then fell down the stairs, the planet took care of everything else after that, So, I mean, that's just a use of it. And that's kind of how we clinically look at violence. We look at that whole thing. It's not, I'm not condoning what happened, but you have to sit there and go, okay, why did that work? And what worked was the individual was able to get off a strike that was enough to take the man's balance. And then he happened to be in a situation where his balance, he lost his balance on a stairwell and went down the stairs. And that's what did the ultimate damage to him. In sports injury, you see the same injuries over and over again. You'll see like broken clavicles. You'll see, throat injuries, eye injuries. You'll see knee injuries. You'll see, mostly the joints of the body will be vulnerable. You'll see sensory systems of the body that are vulnerable, and you learn that. And then what was really interesting for me, which really kind of changed everything, was when I started looking at the prison systems. I have a lot of friends in the law enforcement community. And I started learning I had a discussion with one of my corrections friends who was a training with us. And he was talking to me and he said, because we pretty much talk about the anatomy of the human body, in how we go after the human body. And what's interesting, I want everybody just out of there's a problem with that when you say, like, my system's called target focused training, which is, just a ridiculous name, but it is what it is. But it's because what I tried to focus on was, hey, if I'm going to train you specifically for this type of an event where you're going to have to fight for your life, you devoid of choice, then I want to make sure that wherever you put the effort is going to get you a result right away on the human body. Therefore, where in the human body is that? And we were doing that, with our sports med. We started at I was still at Spec War Command when we started doing all this stuff, and I switched over to Intel. But when they were looking at this system that we originally put in, we had the benefit of having the medical community with us that was there studying all the stuff at Buds. And so we had all these amazing sports medicine docs that started helping us, track all the injuries on the human body and kind of, put this data together. What's interesting, though, is that the group that really took it to that level was after I talked to this corrections officer, and he just kind of made an offhand remark. He said, yeah, we were the other day, we were doing such and such. And you know what? I saw these guys, I saw this gang, and they were training that same thing. They were showing that same area of the human body. What? And so it led me to some more, investigation. And what I quickly found out was that in America, a lot of the top prison gangs, you're talking like Aryan Brotherhood, you're talking Black Guerrilla Family, you're talking Mexican Mafia, the La M, Nuestra, all the Latino gangs. It's interesting at the highest levels, that are run, they all study anatomy of the human body. And they do it because they need to be much more efficient in killing because they can't afford to get it wrong. And the reason they can't afford to get it wrong is not for what people think. It's for business purposes. They have to back their product. They use violence in it's almost a hyper rational way. They don't look at things like, we can have an honest discussion, say, okay, well, Brazilian Jiu Jitsu versus Thai boxing versus this. We'll talk like that. They don't care about any of that. They care about result. They go, hey, if you do this to the human body, we get this result each and every time. And, they literally put edicts out to all of their members that you will study anatomy. And it was really interesting. And the reason is because for them, violence is currency. And so when you have a group of individuals that look at something very objectively, meaning they don't care what comes from what or anything. It's, does it work? Is it easy to learn? Can we replicate it each and every time if we do this right? And that's exactly how they looked at violence. And what was interesting was the more I got into talking with the corrections officers and then interviewing, through them, I would have them ask questions to some of the gang members. And they were surprisingly open about it because I wasn't asking any questions that had to do with anything that the gang would want to protect, protected information. I wasn't interested in learning the ins and outs of, their how they operate. But when it came to physical violence, they were very open and talked about, oh yeah, well, we do this because, we know this works. And, we probably, like, there might be an individual that they have to kill, that they've been contracted to kill in the prison. And it's the reputation of their gang to be able to deliver. They may only get one shot at this individual, and they have to make sure that they deliver on it. And so under those parameters, I tell people all the time, some of the best information when it comes to your own self-protection comes from the worst parts of society. And then it's because they have to look at it in a very clinical, very honest manner, and it's, if you can stomach it, if you can see the value in, not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, you're not condoning the acts. You're certainly not condoning the criminality of everything, but there's good information to learn in there because they have to get it right. They can't afford to get it wrong. And it's not like they have all the answers or anything, but what's really interesting is they have a very logical approach to somebody that has to stop another human. And oftentimes they only have their body or improvised weapons to get it done. And under those conditions, it's amazing how effective they are And the fact that very few of them are trained in traditional martial arts or combat sports. So it was a real eye opener to see how straightforward, violence can be used when you have this roadmap. And the roadmap, I think, kind of the Rosetta Stone is, these vulnerabilities I'm talking about. Where can you get injuries on the human body that are replicable, that each and every human, can have, regardless of, I can work out all I want, but I can't make my throat, my windpipe any stronger, than it's going to be. I can't make my eye any stronger. And it's interesting when you talk to these guys, they look at a 12-year-old girl the same way they look at a 300-pound, yoked out Aryan Brotherhood member. They say a human. They focus on the similarities in the human body, not the differences. Most of the time, like, our clients will come in and they see a bigger, faster, stronger person, and that's all they notice: the fact that he's bigger, he's faster, he's stronger. Whereas the predator looks at that bigger, faster, stronger guy and says, "Oh yeah, there's his throat, there's the groin, there's his clavicle, there's his ear." They noticed in all the similarities, and it's this subtle mind shift that really changes the way you look at violence and the way you look at how to apply violence.
Yeah, it's certainly very different. I think you said in one of your videos where almost every single, if we take out the rule book of mixed martial art, let's say the UFC, and almost every single one of those rules are there to avoid injury, because injury is not good in a competitive setting. These athletes, have trained very hard, and they need to be able to compete repetitively. And also, if it's a commissioned, if it's a commissioned sports, there's certain legal bindings that they need to go through. So the rules are there to protect the fighters so that they can compete without actually injuring each other. Where I think you said that a very good point to start is grabbing the rule book and studying everything that's not allowed, and that should be your starting point. I guess here's a question that I struggle with myself. How do we translate this into training? For example, boxing doesn't have the problem, because in boxing we can replicate in training exactly how we're going to use it out in the field, in the ring. That means I could put on, I could put on my gloves, I can put on a mouth guard, and we can go at it. And it's going to be pretty much exactly like the real thing. Maybe in training we'll wear heavier gloves. We may or may not use headgear, but I have no problem of replicating in my training exactly what I'm going to do out there when I have to use my skills. Obviously, in self-defense training, in these things that we're talking about, in the training, you can, but it's probably not good for, not good for keeping friends and for business, injure your training partners, right? We can't actually, I mean, in a perfect world, I wouldn't take a rubber knife, I'd take a real knife, and I'd give it to one student, and I'd tell the other student, go out for a walk. Right? You don't even know who's coming at you, and I'll get the student, student A to surprise student B somewhere in an alley and just jump at him and start, making holes in him. I'm not going to have many students if I do that. So I have this problem of, I have to use rubber knives. Sometimes we use tasers, by the way, but depending on which country, which certainly gives the oh shit reaction when somebody's coming at you with the taser that's crackling. You tend to respond different when it's a rubber weapon that is not going to penetrate your body. But the problem remains. On the one hand, the attack is not deadly, or it's not the real attack. And on the other hand, for my defense to work, I need to take my fist and I need to put my bare knuckle through the person who's coming at me with a knife. Let's say in this particular, I need to put it through his throat or through his face, and I need to do some real damage. I can't punch people really hard bare knuckle in training either, because they don't tend to stick around for very long. So what's your vision? How do you train on injuring people without actually injuring your training partners?
Yeah, and that's the paradox that everybody talks about all the time, and that's also the thing that people like to say. I love when guys say, "Well, you don't go full speed, so you can't really learn anything." And I'm going, "Okay, well, I go, so you go full speed in areas that can take trauma, that can take non-specific trauma." I said, "So what are you talking about?" Meaning, I punch to the upper pec as hard as I can. I hit a guy. It makes me feel good because I can hit him really hard. He's okay. He might be annoyed on that, but he's not hurt. He's just maybe pissed off. Whereas if I just move that up 4 inches, now I'm right in his windpipe, and I do the same punch, and he's coughing, sputtering, and without medical attention, he's probably going to asphyxiate. So how do you train that? Well, what we found is there's this juxtaposition. You can, if you, we know that, it's body weight, like applying body weight into the strike is key. Through that, you want to hit with all of you each and every time, optimally. You'd like to have everything that you, if you weigh 120 pounds, you'd love to have 120 pounds going through whatever you are, striking on the human body. So what we've done is we found the one thing that you can pull back on is the velocity. And the way you do it is it has to be very, very substantial. So we will have people go through and they'll put that one vulnerable, that hard square inch of them on that vulnerable square inch of the other person, stepping through, replicating everything. And the only thing that's pulling back is the speed. And that's the beginning. And after a while of training back and forth, your limitation on how fast you can go is your partner's ability to react, your partner's ability to give model injuries for you. And how do we know this is valid? Well, it's, again, going back to the prison system. That's exactly how these guys train. They go in, and one of the stories that I tell people all the time is, I came in to interview for an interview that I was doing with this group in corrections. They're like a special unit within corrections. And one of my friends called me over before we started the meeting and said, "Hey, I want you to see this video." And so I came over, and he shows this video, and it was two members of the Black Gorilla family, and they're standing out in the yard, and I'm still trying to get the video. They haven't unclassified. It's kind of controlled. It's a controlled video. I'm pretty sure I'm going to go get it pretty soon. But it was fascinating. It showed two guys standing there, and they had their closed fists, but they're pretending, you could tell they were pretending to hold a knife or a shank or something. And they were just slowly out in the yard, just going out, and they're doing these really weird angles that they were coming in on the body. And it was just really strange to me. I was like, "Oh, that's weird." It didn't look normal to me. It didn't look like anything I'd seen before. The angles that they were going in. And he goes, "What do you think they're doing?" And I was kind of joking. "Oh, is this some new, jail martial art or something like that?" Something. He goes, "No." He goes, "There was a fight out in the yard yesterday." He goes, "They staged it." And, he was thinking, the gangs. He goes, they staged it. He goes, "Watch." And so sure enough, they show there's a fight out in the yard. He shows me that video. The CERT team comes out, their version of the SWAT team comes out to control the situation. Boom. And I see them, they break it up, and they pull the guys out. And he goes, "What did you see in that video?" And I said, "What?" I saw the guys go get it. He goes, "No, look again." And so this time I did. And this time I pulled back my vision, and I started looking at the rest of the yard, everybody else that was down, because everybody was down on the ground. And I looked at all of their heads. They were watching, but they weren't watching what was happening to the two prisoners that were fighting. They were watching all of the SWAT officers, the CERT officers. Why? Because that was brand new gear that they had. They had brand new kit. And what they were registering where's all the vulnerabilities in that? We see where their body armor is and stuff. Where's all the vulnerabilities? And the next day they were training it. And how did they initially train? Slow and methodical, because they realized, if I'm going up against a guy that's going to have this equipment on, I have to know exactly where to put the effort. I mean, they're just, that's what they drilled in, and it was slow and deliberate and just very accurate. I think what people sometimes, if they see people doing training at a slower rate, they somehow think it's weak rather than the intention. It's actually, when you do deep practice, it's called deep practice is what the term they're calling it now. When you do it, you can really only do it for like 20 minutes is exhausting. I mean, you will come out of it mentally exhausted from being that focused on what you're doing. And it has huge benefits. Full speed execution. Now, am I saying that you would never go full speed execution? No. But what I am saying is, everybody that I know that's a predator, worst of the worst type of thing, when they learn something like this, they learn it very slow and deliberate. They lay that foundation before they ever act speed. In the spec ops community, we always talk about crawl, walk, run. And what's interesting is they apply it to firearms, they apply it to explosives, they apply it to just about every aspect. Where do they not apply it? They don't apply it normally in the, the hand-to-hand training. All of a sudden, hand-to-hand has to be full speed right away. Boom, that's the way it is. I'm like, to me, it's the equivocation of, if I'm learning how to do firearms, you give me the safety brief on the firearm. I haven't taken one shot down range. I haven't done anything. And they immediately take me over to the kill house, and the red team's in there waiting for me. Instructor pushes me through the door and says, "Hey, good luck." And everybody starts shooting at you, So to me, to answer, I hope I'm not too roundabout in my answer to the question here. What I really think needs to happen is you have to lay down the foundation first and learn where to go and give yourself that skill set. Same way you do with a firearm. With a firearm, you learn to operate the firearm. You then look at your results on the target. You adjust accordingly in the results. If the results are what you want, you got a tight group. Now you can add something. Now it's like, okay, now I want you to start, moving towards the target, or we'll have the target start to move, or we're going to walk to the side and do stuff. But what's interesting is, just like in that training, anytime there's a decrement in any sort of accuracy, the first thing they take away is speed, and they get right back to that foundation. So it's a way of laying it out. It's never going to be perfect, because the only way you can really do it is, to really do it. And like you said, you'd lose half the class right off the bat to injury if you did that. So what I find hilarious though is like, people will say like, oh, well, how are you going to know it really works if you don't do that? I go, okay, well, how do you know, you've been shooting your 45. Have you ever actually shot anybody with it? Well, how would you know that, it's going to do any damage,
well,
something like that.
That's where there's like, again, look, a lot of my understanding of how to train normal civilized people for violence comes from the army. And I've had a great benefit of learning my trade in the Israeli military. But it's I think a very good place to go, not necessarily for the techniques, but let's say for the scholastic approach of how to teach whatever it is you're teaching in that realm, is the military. Because there've been militaries for thousands of years, and pretty much everyone stands, as we said, everyone stands on the shoulders of the ones who came before them. And I think what you're talking about, firearms training, is a pretty legitimate, let's say, analogy. And what we do in the, let's say, in the infantry or whatnot is, you learn your M4. Now we use Tavor, whatever rifle. You learn how to use it. First, a lot of hours in the shooting range, lying down. Then you learn how to shoot from different positions. Then from behind cover, and then while movement, and then you take it out in the field. And one of the best things, one of the things that I found most effective was we do a lot of live ammunition training. Like the simulations, when we go up to, let's say, the brigade level, is you can be, running, shooting, and in the meantime, your friends are shooting live ammunition next to you, and there's a tank in support firing live rounds. I had an M203 grenade launcher. You're shooting live grenades, and there's explosions everywhere. Like, very few people, if you're not a soldier, you've never experienced anything like this, like the awe, the firepower of explosions going next to you,
Yeah.
feeling the shock waves, like it's overpowering. And
Oh yeah.
doing that again and again and again. And then the first time I found myself in a firefight, um, I was already conditioned to the noise and to the stimuli. And still, I'll say that the first time and I was highly trained by that time, the first time I was in a firearm and people were shooting at me from close range, I'll go out and say, it doesn't matter how many hours I trained, I shot back, but not from in between my sights. It wasn't, even though I'd never, up until that point, all my training, never was I not shooting from in between the shot, maybe while charging. Just instinct, you just put the rifle in and you start shooting. It took a couple of more times of being under fire to also have I don't want to say the clarity, the coolness of mind, because you're not operating under coolness of mind, but being able to exert some sort of control over myself and I was in control. I was very aware of what was going on, but it is, even with that, it's overwhelming. So then I bring the parallel of, I'm with you 100%. There's no point in, day one training a technique and stuff. That's it, go hell for leather. Let's see if you can really protect yourself or not, because you're not there yet. You need to practice the technique, you need to do it slowly, you need to have a partner that's cooperating with you, that's letting you win. Obviously in a real situation, the opponent is not going to let you win, far from it. His objectives are completely, but you need to have somebody kind of working with you so that you can kind of build those skills. But you can't leave, obviously you can't leave it there where you take it eventually. And that's the problem is, okay, so how can we condition people? Mike Tyson has a saying, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And exactly. And for me also, it was a big wake-up call. Like I've been training Krav Maga for a long time, and at a very, very aggressive level. And we used to do full contact sparring, and boxing type training, and kickboxing type training, and grappling and submission, and all of that. And you know what? The first time I went into a boxing gym and I got to box against boxers, I had a wake-up call. And the first time I had to grapple against competitive wrestlers or against Brazilian Jiu Jitsu black belts, also it's different. And I'm not saying like you shouldn't go to a boxing gym to get self-defense skills, but in my mind, I've found that I've had to, and it's not for everybody, but if you take it as a likelihood that you're going to get punched when you're defending yourself, that it's on the cards, it's something very likely that you may take a punch to the face. I damn well want to experience that in a controlled environment with people that I trust, with instructor that's overseeing. I want to be punched in the face a few times before it happens to me for real, let's say, so that when it does happen under threat, I'm not completely shell-shocked and I can carry out through the techniques. And same thing goes, I train slowly, but at some point, and that's the challenge I find as a Krav Maga instructor too, is, okay, we got to really go hell for leather. And the problem is you have to be quite advanced, you and your partner, to be able to go all out, where I go to one student, I say, take a knife and, don't think about your partner. If you don't make 15 holes in him, then like don't bother coming to class next week. I'm not really there, but whatever. You're going to be punished by doing burpees. It's you against him, and you need to make holes, and not because. I say this to my students. Most of you who come to my classes, you're not psychopaths. Like, you're good people, and if I give you a stick, and even if it's padded, and I say hit your student, your friend, as hard as you can in your head, I've done it enough times to know you're not going to do it. You might think that you're doing it, but somewhere in your mind, you want them to succeed. You don't want them to fail. And certainly if I bring up a student in front of the class and I say, stab me, they don't want to be the schmuck who made their instructor look bad. So a
Right.
lot of the times when I'm demonstrating a technique in front of my students, I might have to spend a good 3 minutes prepping the student of saying, like, I want you to stab me and I want you to bypass all these things. So I guess where I'm getting at is that in order to be able to simulate a real situation, and even then we're still pretty far from it, is I need a student who can, attack like crazy with a knife, while if the one in front of them can also really hit them and do stuff, but without injuring each other. And it's really a fine balance to play. And sometimes it's fun. Sometimes you have the student who's got a bit of Brazilian Jiu Jitsu practice, and he comes and he tries to take the bigger, the bigger student down. And then to his surprise, when the student does a fucking not a bench press, he does he can do an Olympic lift,
Overhead press him, yeah,
and overhead press, and just throw him up against the wall. That's fun for me.
Yeah.
But the problem is it takes years of training till you can go nuts without actually injuring each other. And that's always that's
Right.
always been the challenge of how can we go to the, yes, I'm not saying there's certainly a place for slow training, not a place like it needs to be the first step of the training. You need to practice and you need to do it slow. And every time you're learning something new, and every time, as you say, every time you hit a problem, you go back and you go, okay, let's drill this and let's get this slow. But also I need to train, I need to get used to doing these things when my heart is pumping, when I'm fight or flight, and then it becomes something different. So it's not an either or, but it's like how do you build the perfect picture so that the student can do it under stress, can do it when the partner is not cooperating with them. And the best answer I've been able to, and it's not an answer that I'm satisfied with, as a skilled instructor, you need to be able to paint a picture. Just like same thing in the boxing gym. You're not going to be full contact, hard sparring all day. In fact, if you've got a bit of experience with this, you know that hard sparring is a very small part of the training. I'm going to do a lot of bag work. I'm going to do a lot of focus mitts. I'm going to do general fitness stuff. I'm going to do very scripted or limited training where for example, where my partner is only going to be throwing a set combination, where I'm only going to practice at getting better at defending the jabs. And then I might do a drill where one partner only attacks and the other part, I'm really kind of trying to build all the aspects of the picture together. And we can do that in self-defense training. But what we can't do is you can't simulate the actual fight night. We can't actually send our student into a bad neighborhood wearing an incendiary t-shirt or something, or we can't send them into a favela in Brazil with a Rolex and say, well, this is your black belt test, good luck.
Yeah and that's that's the juxtaposition and stuff. I mean, you can only take people so far, and they just have to experience the real thing. What I try to prep my students for is, we assume that, listen, I know the first time I had to use it, I went tunnel vision right away. All these things happen to you. And so in the way we approach the training, the tunnel vision actually helps because you're only looking for one part of the human body. You don't know which one it's going to be. But what's interesting is usually from whatever position you find yourself in, at that point, there will be one part of the human body that you will recognize. And that's my goal. My goal is to make sure that the person recognizes an opportunity and how to exploit it. And the feedback I've been getting from my people, and it's what happened to me as well, the first time I had to use it, was there's all the same things happen, all the same things, you get the surprise, you get the you get ambushed or whatever, and you go into flinch and you do everything. And then then all of a sudden you see something that's available to you. If the person has not been successful in, doing a strike on you that's taking you out of the commission, if you can still think and move, you may have been hit. You may have had, like I tell people all the time, I mean, you might find yourself on one knee, looking down at a fistful of chiclets that used to be your teeth, but you can think and move, and then you come up and now you see that bladder is right there. And you recognize that because why? We've drilled it so many times, that's an opportunity for you. And then you just slam your elbow right into it. And that's your starting point. And that's where you go from. And that's what I try to drill into everybody is that we do ramp the velocity up. I will have people do that. As long as they don't get too sloppy. That's my big concern is that, you'll lay in bad habits. And the other thing that is something is I want to make sure that people learn to, as often as possible, deploy as much body weight into each strike. And what I find oftentimes is when we increase velocity, we pull back on proper follow through. And so we train people to do strikes that deliberately don't deploy body weight. They just come up and they look very aggressive, but when you really look at it, the person's still like standing in place. Their belt buckle is still in the same area, and whatever strike they're using, versus arms, legs, whatever, no body weight's been deployed into the strike because they're more focused on speed than anything else. So it's as an instructor, it's a challenge all the time to do this. I expect people to be, especially when we do multiple attacker drills, no matter how fast or slow you do them, people still are stressed out, each and every time. Even if you're going at a very slow rate, that really ramps people. So we get to the point to where with me, after the initial training that I put you through, say like a 2-day course, so you understand the fundamentals and everything that's going on, from then on, you're going to be working with at least 2 other people at all times. So you're going to be working with 2 different bodies. You're going to get used to seeing more than one person. You're going to have to be aware of your peripheral, but we don't do it in a way that overwhelms them right away and causes them to freeze. We work at a rate where they get used to it. So after a while, they're used to they know they have to get off the X. They know they have to keep moving. They know they have to keep going because there's somebody else they have to worry about at that time. So there's ways to do the drills that you can simulate it, but nothing, as you know, when it happens, it happens, and everybody's going to have that initial thing. I remember the first time it happened to me, I was sitting there just telling myself, oh my God, this is real. This is actually happening. I'm actually going to have to, I had to wake up real quick and get right into it at that point. But you're pointing out one of the big challenges. And I think what do we do? Do we give up accuracy so we can go harder, and then teach people to hit in areas that a bigger, faster, stronger person, it may not be effective, it's just this weird juxtaposition that we have to train. And I can only keep pointing back to the people that have to use violence to survive. And it's amazing how many of them use, a foundation of slow, deliberate training. When I say a foundation, it's exactly what you're talking about. It is not that you stay there. It's that you learn the skill set at that level, and you earn I tell people already, you have to earn the right to use velocity, and you have to show me that you put the time in to then sit there and then add speed to this. Because if you're gonna just have shitty mechanics and about the way you're holding your body and everything, I'm not, no, you're not going to get speed at that point.
I think there's also a hyper focus on and you can't help but going there, but there's this hyper focus of this, we see ourselves, me personally, or you, like as an instructor, we always fall in this trap. There's this hyper focus of a combat setting. In your book, you talk about, I think it was a student. She was attacked. There was in English dorm, or in a sorority, like in her dorm bedroom. Somebody came in, and you'll go more into that in a second, but that's a beautiful example of a situation. It's not like we like to see ourselves like in the movies, right? Where it's me against the 4 ninja assassins, and or if it's a one-on-one thing. That's rarely the case. And I think also in the prison system, it's not a fair fight. It's not a situation. They're not looking for, okay, prisoner X, prisoner Y, and they're gonna go for it. They're gonna shank you from behind if they get the
Oh yeah.
chance. And that's
Oh, yeah.
that's really, to me, that's violence. That, not
Yeah.
competition. That's really what we're training and what we're preparing for.
Yeah, and that's what I learned. I learned that early on when I was a kid. My grandfather was originally my family is from the Boston area of the kind of, Boston, Massachusetts area, and Boston is known. It was a pretty rough town, really big boxing town. And my grandfather was a huge boxer, when he grew up, and so he'd take me around to the boxing gyms when I was a kid. And he would tell me that when he was growing up, there was this guy. His name was Whitey. I forgot what the last name was. But he was famous because he was a sparring partner of Jack Dempsey. And what they learned was two things. Whitey never got his title shot because the mob always wanted him to take a fall so they could make money off of him. And that he was, he had to constantly, worry about that. And that he was punch drunk at the end. And people used to think it was because of his training with Jack Dempsey. But it actually, the thing that put him over the edge, or that really did the damage to him, was a beating that he took from the mafia for not taking a dive in the fight. It was the same thing. He had no warning whatsoever. He was jumped out in the street, and they just beat him senseless, and that to me is real violence. I then understood, because I remember telling my grandfather, I said, well, but he's such a great boxer. How could that happen? And, my grandfather said, oh, you don't understand. He goes, they weren't trying to fight him. They just wanted to hurt him. And that's how he did. And I realized that even as a little kid, I realized, oh, there's a difference between the two. It doesn't mean because I'm learning how to box, because I was a little kid learning how to box at the time, that doesn't mean that I can't be hurt, because in your little mind, you think, oh, that's why I'm doing this. Nobody can hurt me now. And I learned very early on that there was a very different thing called violence, and that it really didn't play favorites at all. And that it's actually a very easy tool to use. Like destruction is actually a very easy skill set. Whereas combat sport, to be really proficient in a combat sport, that's a skill level you have to have. And that takes great skill and great acumen. And the hard part about that is for people is they put such amazing amounts of time into their combat sports, and they become excellent practitioners. And I think it's just it's hard for them to wrap their head around the fact that an untrained person can walk up behind you with a hammer, hit you over the head, and take you out. And I just think that's a hard thing for a lot of people that have trained a long time to swallow. They want to think that whatever they're doing is somehow going to protect them from violence. And, I tell people all the time, the tool of violence is only good if you're the one using it. If it's being used on you, it's just as effective. And I mean, once you get past that, once you understand that we're all susceptible to this, and it can easily be done to you, if somebody, injures you, you're going to react the exact same way as anybody else is going to react. Meaning, if they get the injury, I have to be very clear on that. People sometimes sit there and say, well, no, I know a guy that was punched, name whatever it is, and he didn't react. Well, he didn't get the injury. That wasn't an injury as we're talking about. Like an injury that we're talking about doesn't matter whether the individual feels pain or not. It would be the equivalent of the radiologist looking at the film, looking at the x-ray, saying, I don't care what this guy feels, this isn't working, and that's what we're talking. We're talking about objective injury to the human body. And it takes work to do that. We're not trying to hurt him. We're not trying to cause pain. We're trying to decrement a function. We're either trying to break a structure of the human body, or we're trying to shut down a sensory system of the human body. And if we haven't achieved one of those two, we have not got injury as we define it. But to back to your point, it's that idea that I think is really hard for people to wrap their heads around, is that, that violence is just this really, I think the more intimidating thing from people learning this is not the fact that they see it can be done, is that they realize that they can do it, that it's really easy for them to do it. I think a lot of people just have a hard time wrapping around their head going, hey, this is pretty easy for me to learn. Doesn't require a great skill set for me to learn how to do damage to this part of the body. And I think that's hard for a lot of people to wrap their heads around. They want an excuse why they want to say, well, I won't be good for 3 years. Whereas I can teach people something that, like that girl, she didn't train. She trained for me without just that one little seminar we did. And, like 2.5 years later, it happened to her. She hadn't trained since. But what she remembered the part of the human body.
Can you go in a bit more detail?
Yeah, basically, it was a young girl that I trained. She was going to college. I was on a cruise ship. I was invited by an organization to go on a really nice cruise ship. And the whole group had taken over the whole cruise ship. And it was a family cruise for this organization. And one of the things they asked me to do was they had a lot of college age girls that were going off to school. And they said, hey, listen, we'd like to get all the dads together with their daughters, switch it up. So different dads would work with different daughters, but everybody would feel safe within it. But my big thing is with women, I always want them working against men, because that's the profile they're going to be dealing with. It's not that women can't work together. It's just, I want them used to different male body types all the time. And so we did that. And to her credit, I mean, she did the course. She none of the girls wanted to be there. It was a cruise ship, and there were so many other fun things for them to do. And in fact, they had to spend, some time with me, rolling around on the decks with their dads was not, the optimal thing, but she did it. And, so I don't think much of it. We do the rest of the cruise and everything. And then about 3 years later, I'm in New York doing one of my seminars, and I see her come in all of a sudden. I hadn't been paying attention to who, my staff had booked for this particular course. I just showed up and, I started seeing the group. Well, I see her come in, and she's got her sisters behind her, like all these other kids. And she comes up and she says, hi, I don't know if you remember me. And I said, oh yeah, how you doing? How's your dad? But when she goes, you didn't hear. And I said, no. She goes, well, listen, I just want you to know I was attacked in college. She told me the whole story. Basically, she was in a dorm room on the first floor of a dorm, which is like an apartment building for kids that go to college. She had wood floors on there, but she had a bed. She and her roommate each had beds. They have these beds in college at universities where they have the desk below the bed and the bed's above, so it's just to consolidate, space and everything. So she was up on her bed. She had her girlfriend that was her roommate. She spent on average about 3 days a week at her boyfriend's apartment. And there was a predator that had been, just watching them for weeks. And he knew the routines. He knew everything there. He knew that they didn't leave their windows locked. She said, we were just really lackadaisical in our security. We thought we were safe on campus. It didn't happen. So sure enough, one night she wakes up. It's about 2:30 in the morning. And she wakes up to this guy right on top of her on the bed. And that's her starting point. That's where she wakes up. And it was really interesting. This is where, when people tell me, they say, oh, what can you learn in a couple of hours or blah, 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 or anything. The first thing she thought was, he's not close enough. It was like, she goes, it's like you possessed me all of a sudden. She goes, and that's what happens. The human brain goes back and, hey, he sees a situation, sees a threat, goes, what do I have? What do I have in the toolbox here? And she went right back to that thing, because that was one of the profiles that we were dealing with the girls, was, various rape profiles and stuff. And her first thought was, oh, he's not close enough. And she also realized the position, because I always tell the girls, hey, listen, when there are certain positions, it's uncomfortable, it's great, but in order for them to do anything, they're going to have to move. And that's when you have an opportunity. And she realized that. So she knew the covers were still up above her, and that he would have to move the covers down at some point. And that means he would have to bring himself closer to her. And so sure enough, he did go to do that. That's when she went in, she wrapped her arm around the back of his neck, and she went right into his eye right away, which he wasn't expecting at all. Most of the predators are used to, people just capitulating right away and just giving in. So it caught him off guard. She got her thumb pretty good into his eye at that point. He had a huge violent reaction, which is why she knew to hang on. He literally took her off the bed. And as she was coming down, the hand that had punctured the eye, Then, he was falling with his back and she was on top of him. She didn't mean to do it, but her forearm ended up going across his throat as all her body weight dropped on the floor. And she felt the crushing of the cartilage, and she felt him kind of like exhale, like this. And just, he kind of released at that point. She was able to get up, run out, and start screaming down the hall. And by the time they got back, security got in there and everything, the guy had asphyxiated and was no longer a threat. He had been a guy, I guess, that had multiple sexual assaults on his ticket, and had done multiple states. But what was interesting was she had her sisters in tow, and the whole thing was, she said, I'm really lucky that I had that to rely on at the end. She said, but she goes, the reason I brought my sisters is because I want them to listen to you on what I didn't listen to you about, which was, we had no situational awareness. We didn't protect our security. She's, everything we did could have been prevented. She goes, and I didn't do any of that. And luckily I survived this. And I don't want my sisters to ever go through that. So I thought it was really interesting that was her takeaway from it, and she was okay with it. She did go through counseling and everything, but she was fine because she understood that she truly was devoid of choice. And so she was able to, process it and not have a life where she lived fearfully or anything, or with regret or anything like that, which I thought was very interesting.
It's also a very big part in the let's say the therapy. I've actually got a degree in psychology. I did that before going into or it was more correctly part of kind of my my pursuit of teaching and training self-defense. But what I found is that a lot of times these tools also help people process. Nothing gives people as a soldier and as a combat soldier, I'm a bit I'm more familiar than I'd like to be with PTSD through friends in my units. I've had my bouts, and I get exactly where it comes from. It comes from this feeling of helplessness, and it's even a lot of times it's actually really strong for people who are used to feeling quite able and capable. And that's why, in my mind, it hits soldiers very strongly. It's as a soldier, as a trained soldier, you're somebody who's fairly confident in their ability. And when you get sidelined by something that just nothing prepared you for, and you didn't have an answer for, it just hits you psychologically really, really hard. And sometimes somebody who's been through a sexual assault, somebody who's been in a difficult situation, giving them something to do, some tool. It doesn't have to be the most effective. It doesn't have to be the answer all. It doesn't mean that that's it. You solved all their problems and they're bulletproof. But just giving them something that gives them some sort of a fighting chance makes the world of a difference. I heard a combat medic in Australia talk about it as having, at least having a dog in the fight, like having something that that you could apply. It takes away that helplessness, and that's why I find the self-defense training, it also gives people the tools, but it really serves a part in giving people confidence. And if I have confidence, I'm also going to be more likely to be able to use those tools. That's where the training comes in, and especially sometimes more challenging training, that if I've been through that type of stuff, let's say I'm more confident. If somebody comes and puts a knife at my throat and says, get in the car, right. If I have nothing, then I have no other choice. If I have some resemblance of a technique, even if I'm absolutely a beginner, at least I've got an option. It might not be a very good option, and maybe 95% of the rolls of the dice will end up with me dying. But at least I have that 5%, and that's where my choice goes. And I think your I mean, the example, which is a phenomenal example, and good on her. And I certainly am not going to lose any sleep over this, predator not being on the street any longer. And certainly she did a service to humanity. Um, but these are the situations often that we should be thinking and be training for. It's not a situation where, you big tough guy who's been training for martial art for 5 years, and somebody of equal size, of lesser skill, challenges you for a duel over a parking spot. Can you beat them or not? No, it's a situation of, you're walking with your kid, and you meet a group of predators. It's like, what do you do there?
Yeah.
And the answer is not clear. It's certainly not
Yeah.
clear. And I guess that goes to very, very important point of how I think, and I think you're with me on that. It's not like the techniques are, let's say, the tools, but it's not the actual applications. How we get there, it's really about creating the scenarios and the environment of people having to hone their craft. And this kind of maybe goes full circle. As an instructor, I have my techniques that I like, and that's what I teach, and that's what I believe that works. And then I'm going to recreate the scenarios in which my tools work perfectly. And the other alternative is, I'm going to give you some options. They work for me. They work for quite a few people because I have a lot of experience, and I'm a smart guy and I've thought about this. But it's not going to work against everybody. It's not going to work for everybody. And again, defining work is also, maybe work or not work. It's not a black and white. It's, let's say, the level of effectivity. But what actually is, I find very useful, is putting students and myself in situations and saying, hey, good luck. Here's some stuff that you've learned. And now apply it. And maybe often people will surprise you. Often people will find applications that you may not have thought of, or you may not have taught them, and that in itself, like, it's really hard to teach, like the situation you spoke about, that she fell off the bed and her hand just happened to be on the windpipe, and some of it was trained and some of it was just luck and some of it was instinct. But the more I can put people in different situations and different scenarios that mimic reality, as opposed to that my techniques that I like to teach, my tool bag, express themselves excellent, then their skills are going to carry out. Because, okay, you can use your knife defense or block or whatnot, okay, against one-on-one. Now let's put two people against you. Now let's put you on the ground. Okay, now let's put you caught by surprise, and now let's put you after running where you can't breathe. And the more I can create scenarios, then okay, that specific tool, either I have more credibility for it works, or maybe it's not going to work everywhere. But what I get at the end of the day is I get a practitioner, I get an individual who's faced and thought a lot about different problems and is good as adapting. And sometimes, I mean, I loved what you said. She did a couple of hours with you, and sometimes people come for like a 3-hour seminar, and they're not going to learn the technique that I taught them. Maybe they will, but what happened is the wheels started turning. Back to the helplessness. Like, if one of the foundation techniques we teach is what to do if somebody's got their hands on your throat choking you, it's something we deal with in Krav Maga. Okay, somebody who's never thought about that as an option, somebody who's never had somebody's hands on their throat, is going to have a difficulty dealing with that the first time it ever happens to them. They're going to be completely blindsided. Doesn't matter. Maybe they did years of Taekwondo, which is great, not bagging on Taekwondo, but if they've never had somebody on their throat, it's going to be kind of like we have fight or flies. It's going to be likely the freeze response, because there's not a mental pathway that's been built to deal with that. But sometimes if you come to a workshop with me and you just had somebody's hands on your throat, we started building those neuron connections for that pathway. And maybe you won't remember the technique, but the situation is familiar to you.
Right. And I think that's the other thing that people miss. I don't train people with the idea of the duel, like that people are going to know, because quite frankly, most of the people that have been successful using the skill sets they've learned from us, if we put them in that dual situation against the predator they were up against, we know how it all would turn out. You know, is there what I think people misunderstand with the way I put my training out is I'm teaching my people to be able to exploit an opportunity that a predator gives them, because the predator doesn't take them as a serious threat, meaning the predator will bring something vulnerable close to them out of intimidation or however they've done in the past. And now my client has an opportunity. You know, they know how they can exploit the opportunity. And I also look at my training too. I guess a better way of putting it is at the very beginning, other than those that stay with me and keep training after, I really, when I do my seminars and everything, I equate it to taking a CPR course. And you can give some very effective information to people in a CPR type format where, and I try to tell lifelong martial artists this and fighters and people when they look at something like, well, what can you learn in a weekend seminar? And I said, you know, how many doctors make fun of CPR training? You know, they don't. They recognize it's a very limited scope of what you're learning. It's a life-saving skill that can be taught very quickly, and you can do something. Same thing in a self-defense seminar, not the illusion that you can go out and become a great fighter or anything like that, but I can convey enough information to somebody over that period of time to where I can give them skill sets that will keep them to avoid everything that's avoidable if they follow that information. And then I can give them enough information that if they get themselves in that imminent situation, at least they have some options. At least they know areas of the human body that have, you know, vulnerabilities, and hopefully they'll be able to, like this girl, you know, exploit one of them. And, you know, by putting them in those uncomfortable positions, I have no illusions that I am training somebody who is a competent combat sport practitioner or could compete in combat sports in any way, shape, or form. That's not the goal of what I'm doing. You know, violence is a very simple skill set. You know, it's destruction is a very simple skill set, and it's has a very narrow window where it would ever be useful. And that's my goal in training somebody. You know, initially, I can refine them if I have the luxury of training them longer. Sure, there's all sorts of things I can train them, and they can get better and better at that skill set. But unfortunately, that's just a small part of the population you're going to come in contact with that you'll be able to do that.
I really liked what you said about taking advantage of an opportunity, because, for example, we deal a lot with knives. So again, with the knife attack, somebody's coming to stab you. If I'm coming to stab somebody, the mechanics, my body, the way that I'm going to do it is going to be very different from if I'm stepping into a knife fight, whatever that means. So, right. For example, if I'm coming to stab you, and I've analyzed hours and hours of footage. That's something, this is an advantage that we have nowadays that we didn't have 20 years ago. In the Israeli army, every single situation that's we how you say we
record it, your camera, body cams.
Not everything's recorded, but we debrief. So for example,
debriefs. Okay, yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah,
in the old
after
days,
action reports.
Exactly, after action reports. So in the old days, if there was a soldier that, you know, somebody tried to that Krav Maga was used, the report would see its way to the desk of the Krav Maga office, and we'd study it, exactly what happened, and we'd learn, okay, what worked and what didn't work. Nowadays, a lot of things are caught on CCTV, and we've spent hours and hours analyzing of stabbing attacks. And we found a couple of interesting things. One of the things, and this is, I think, more, we have to understand that these are terror related. I think street violence is a bit different, but not very different, because still at the end of the day, these are natural human instincts and reactions. 90%, even more, it was very, very rare, extremely rare, to find an attack with a knife which is not an overhand stab directed towards the throat, directed towards the chest. Almost never did we see a attack from below, targeting towards from down up towards the stomach or towards the abdominal, and straight stabs were almost were unheard of. In street violence, straight stabs are a bit more common, but it was The vast majority were overhead stabs directly towards the neck and towards the throat. Now, when somebody comes at me to talking about the opportunity, taking use of opportunities, when somebody's coming to stab me with an overhead stab directly towards me, it's they trying to get their full body into an attack. It's not, they're not going to have both hands up. One hand is going to be as a counter leverage. Their head is going to be probably out in the open, and they're going to do everything they can to be able to smash with their full body weight down to be able to penetrate the body. Now, this gives me an opportunity because their face isn't protected, their head is out in the open, and anybody who's done even a very little bit of full contact sparring knows that the best time to hit somebody is when their chin isn't tucked, when their head is wide open, and when they don't have their hands up. One small hit is going to make their head go back, and they're going to either lose their balance, but they're certainly not going to be able to continue coming back and stabbing. And I've had a student who was in that particular exactly situation where somebody came, overhead stab. He wasn't even very well trained. He was an officer in the reconnaissance unit of the paratroopers. And it was funny because even when he was showing me the punch that he did, when he was telling me the story and he was mimicking it, you could see that his block and his punch were awful from a technique perspective. It was awful. His elbow was out, but the response was effective. The guy fell back. He was completely not expecting it because in his mind, he was coming to stab a guy. He wasn't prepared to get punched. And in boxing, the punch that puts you flat on your ass is the one that you don't see coming. And that's, for me, taking advantage of an opportunity where if it was a different situation, if now we're knife fighting, right? And I'm here, with my hands up and I've got my knife up and I'm ready and I'm expecting you to give me a response. First of all, I don't like your chances. Second of all, that's not really something we engage with, and it's something completely different. Same thing if I'm coming to choke you, right? If I want to kill you, if it's a guy against a woman, that's the guy's larger. It's pretty common attack to take both of your hands and to put it on somebody's throat and to squeeze their throat until they can no longer breathe. You're never going to see that. You're never going to see that in competitive fighting. Why? Because it's not a very good strategy. When I have both of my hands on your throat, A is you can kick me in between the legs. B is my hands are out in the open. I can't defend myself against punches. And even when I'm coming to initiate that, I'm completely open. It's not a very good fighting strategy. It's a very good way to kill somebody and to assault somebody who's smaller than you. So again, this opens up opportunities. If somebody's coming to grab me by the throat and both of their hands are open, I know that they're open, they're wide open for attack and they're not ready. And so again, it's this different in mindset between sport fighting where both fighters are ready. They know exactly what they're there for. They know exactly what the rules are. They know their opponent. Hell, they've probably even watched their opponent's last 5 fights on video and analyze it with their coach, let alone the big unknown, the big unquestioned. When somebody's coming to assault, that's why I don't like the word fight. I like the word assault. When somebody's coming to assault, they're not expecting a fight.
Right.
And that's
why
an
they
opportunity.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's why they picked it. So that's the sole opportunity. We say your opponent, you said this, they're bigger, they're stronger, they're faster than you. They've chosen the location. They've chosen their target. They've chosen the means of attack. They've chosen everything. Everything is against you. The only thing that you have in your favor is that they're not expecting you to fight back. And that's a very big advantage of that. And that also, if you go in the mindset of fighting, as opposed to disengaging, then you can be in a lot of trouble because maybe you can kick them, maybe you can scratch them in the face, whatever it is, you can, even without training, you can just be ferocious to be able, like the girl, of putting her thumb through his eyes, and he had a strong response, and maybe that's enough for you to get away. Job done. But if you're training like a competitive fighter and you're going to follow that thumb up to the eye with an elbow, with a kick to the groin, with a hammer strike to the face, with a jab, cross, hook, uppercut, well, guess what? Somewhere along your second or your third strike, if they're a strong, tough person, there's a very good likelihood that they're going to shake it off, and now you're in a duel. Now you're in a real fight with somebody who's bigger and stronger than you, and your chances are.
And they know you know something. Good. Yeah.
Exactly. So
you're absolutely right.
You've just lost your only advantage, and that's why it really fits. Like the stuff that you talk about really, really gels with me in terms of taking advantage of the opportunity, in terms of aiming for injury, and finish. It's not about fighting, it's about finishing the confrontation by any means
Right.
necessary.
Yeah. Yeah. And then that's just it. I don't want to compete with somebody. I want to find out how good they are because they're going to show me. And it's just a different approach to the tool. You know, I think the approach, the way I kind of put it out is like, you know, a combat sport is the equivalent of like being in a seminar. Like if I had, you know, like 40 people in a seminar and I brought in a huge block of Italian marble. And I said, hey, listen, I brought in the finest chiseling artistic tool sets. And I said, okay, the class does not leave here until you guys have produced, you know, Michelangelo's David. They'd probably be there 1,000 years and it would never happen. But if I took that same block of marble, put it in there, and I came in with 40 sledgehammers, and I said, okay, nobody goes to lunch until this is a pile of rubble, they'd get to work real fast and they'd figure out how to do it. Because again, and so what I try to tell people, that's the difference between combat sports and destruction. Destruction is a very simple, it's just, everybody knows how to swing a sledgehammer. They may not do it perfectly, but they're gonna get that pile of rubble eventually because they can achieve that. Very few people are ever going to rise to level that the top people in combat sports rise to. It requires incredible skill, incredible dedication, and just painstaking amount of training. And very few people can achieve that. Even those that want to, that strive towards it, they just they never reach that skill set. So it's just, one's achievable for everybody. And it's so funny, like other people talk about this all the time too. They like, I remember Jack Dempsey wrote a book. He was a heavyweight boxing champ, and he wrote a great book called Championship Fighting. And he talks about the fact that the reason he wrote the book was because in the late 50s and 60s, boxing started getting away from being, like in his day, it was all about being able to deploy body weight, get into the shot, and people were taught that way. And they were taught to kind of win the fight, like really to take your opponent out. And then he was lamenting the fact that boxing was turning into more of a rule-based point system. And he felt that it was taking away its ineffectiveness to train people for self-protection. And he thought, in his mind, he thought boxing was a very good way. And growing up, I understand that was my grandfather's generation. They all boxed. They all loved boxing. And it was just kind of, not only was it like a rite of passage, but it was also a very acceptable way to learn how to start to protect yourself, was that. And then he felt boxing was getting away into like, okay, now we're just all about winning the competition. And it doesn't really matter if we're necessarily effective strikers anymore. That's not necessarily the focus of the game. And you hear it, like I hear guys in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, famously it was Hicks and Gracie who was saying that, hey, a lot of Jiu Jitsu has gotten away from their version of the self-protection aspects of it, to favor the competition side, which really doesn't help you if you need to use it to protect yourself. And so it's just this integration. It's the danger of gamification of violence that to win the game, you can manipulate the rules. You can focus on certain aspects to win the competition that don't necessarily translate to useful information if you need to protect yourself.
Well, it's a bit of a hard one with the jiu-jitsu, because like, maybe not everybody will know what I'm talking about, but certainly people from the jiu-jitsu side, like jiu-jitsu became famous through the Gracie challenge, right? The Gracies would famously welcome anybody, did fight anybody, anywhere, anytime, come to our gym, and they won, and they always won, and it became very and then later through Royce Gracie and the original UFCs and stuff, it became very much that. But again, I would say that that's still not self-defense. I would argue, I'm not incredibly versed on self-defense, but I would say that jiu-jitsu, as I've come across it, it's very much again designed for one-on-one confrontation, specifically for one-on-one confrontation, that you can get control of somebody without injuring your opponents. And that's where it absolutely excels at. Jiu-jitsu,
Yes.
jiu-jitsu is beautiful at controlling another opponent, can be bigger than you, because we've certainly seen very good jiu-jitsu practitioners completely control and manhandle fighters that were much larger than them without injuring them. And that's really a very big part of it. Because again, let's say in the Gracie, think of it as you walk into somebody else's gym to engage. There's still this level of, if me and you are going to engage in the match, it's even if there's no specified rules, it's very clear that it's not a duel to the death. And I'm not going to, unless I'm a psychopath, even if, and I got to be a little bit cuckoo, let's say, to walk into somebody else's gym and say, I'll show everybody I'll show all your students that you're worth nothing. That's not such a nice member of society, but there's certainly those people out there. But even then, to take it that one extra step and to be able to take it to the viciousness required, that's a hard sell. So yes, I can see the comment about jiu-jitsu and sport fighting, but being what we talked about, also jiu-jitsu and self-defense, where it's designed for if I'm teaching self-defense, I need to have an answer how I train somebody who's relatively small, even a relatively small female, to be able to ward off a much physically stronger male. And that's a really tough one. If anybody says, oh, I've got the perfect answer, first of all, they don't know what they're talking about, because there is no one simple answer. And it's a pretty tall order already. But to be able to apply arm bars, choke holds, to that effect, that wouldn't be my chosen tool.
No, and it's funny, and you'll say that, and people will think somehow you think jiu-jitsu is ineffective for what it is. That's not true at all. What you're just pointing out is, I think what's funny is I was listening to a podcast the other day, and it was a bunch of combat sport guys talking, and what was really interesting was they started talking about violence. They started talking about stories about violence, and their whole demeanor changed. Like, they were talking about this, and they realized, like, it wasn't, I don't think they necessarily could verbalize it this way, but what I saw was they realized, hey, this has nothing to do with what we train. And, like they were talking about it almost like in not awe-inspired tones, but almost like ominous. Like they were saying, oh my God, this guy did this, and this, and they talk about, well, this guy wasn't really even that good at whatever the combat sport was. But he was just this individual that was really intense, and he knew how to hurt people and blah, blah, blah. And what they're saying is that, there's a very different, violence is a very different animal, and training to deal with that is a very different methodology than training to deal with, a combat sport problem, because, the goal of combat sport is not to maim, cripple, and kill your opponent. That's not the idea. There's no sportsmanship in it, and there's no place for injury. There's no place for deliberate injury to the human body in a combat sport. I don't want to wreck my opponent. Like last night in the UFC, they just had, Chris Weidman was in there, and he went to do a kick, and the same thing happened to him that happened to Anderson Silva. He literally broke his fib and tib.
That was awful.
It was terrible.
One slow-mo that I'm having trouble getting out of my head, but that's violence. That's violence.
Yeah, exactly. And that's just it. That's not, the goal was never for that to happen. It was an accident, and people recognized it right away. Now, whereas on the street, that would be something somebody would want to do to somebody else, even though it was done, by a kick. It wasn't a deliberate attempt. But what I try to tell people all the time is, whatever ends combat sports, if there's a foul or an accident and it ends the competition, that's where violence begins. That's the beginning of violence. And that's what people don't understand. It's not glorification of it.
People sense it though. Like an example would be, People, I hate that people talk street fighting. Who would win in a street fight?
Right.
There's nothing I hate more than the street fight. What the hell? What the hell is a street fight? But I know what they're talking about. They're talking about a competition, right?
Yeah.
Just because something happens on the street, it doesn't mean that there are no rules. There's still the rules of morality in society. I'll give the example. If not you and I, let's say, whoever were to meet outside of a parking lot and somebody pulled into my parking spot, right? And
Right.
we get into it and we both make an active decision. And that's a big here too. We both choose to engage with each other. I push him,
Right.
he pushes me, he says some words, I say a word. We've both, and also as far as the law sees it in most countries, we've both made an active decision to participate in
Yep.
this. Why? Because
Yep.
any one of us could have just walked away, or even better, just
Exactly.
turned around and run. So first of all, we've both made the decision to be there. That's one idea, that this is a competition and this isn't violent. Well, it is violent, but it's not. It's competitive. It's not assault. Second, okay, so we go at it. He throws punches. I throw some punches. Okay, let's say I land a good punch and I knock them onto the ground. In the meantime, of course, all the bystanders have got their phones out. They're recording the whole thing, right? In the schoolyard too, two kids are going at it. Everybody else has got their cameras out. Okay,
Right.
this is competition, and it's inbuilt in our DNA. Men compete for food, for mates, for dominance. It's built in our DNA. This is competition. Okay, but then the moment individual A, thug A, knocks thug B down onto the ground, the moment he starts stomping his head into the pavement and effectively killing him, nobody's recording with their phones anymore. People are running for their life. People are calling the police. The rules, and make no mistake, there are rules. The rules have been broken, and this is no longer a competition now. This is a violent assault. And this is where the realm of what you and I, this is where we live, in assault. The competitions, when the phones are out and stuff, now that's a pretty good indicator. If the phones are out, this is not self-defense. Of course, the exception to the rules. A lot of the times, it's funny because you and I, we study these things. A lot of times when we're looking for the stuff, we'll see it in CCTV, things that are caught on bystanders. It's rare, not unheard of, but we won't find the stuff that we want normally on handheld phone stuff. That's normally, two dickheads trying to show who's the alpha male.
Right. Yeah. I mean, what's interesting is what you've done is people up until that point, while they're using their phones and doing all that, they're looking at a competition and they're looking for a social outcome. And what do I mean by that? They're looking to say, okay, who's going to be, hey, we know these two guys, they've challenged each other. They've come in, we got to see who's the alpha, who comes out ahead. Maybe is the underdog going to win this time, or is the, the bully still going to win? And they're trying to figure that out. As soon as it goes to what you're talking about, the stomping and the violence, at that point, everybody disperses. Why? Because there's nothing to be learned. There's violence has no, there's no good knowledge that you're going to get out of violence. You just want to get away from it because you don't want to participate in it. If you're a sane, human being. And that's what's really interesting is the fact that when I think what makes people so uncomfortable about violence is there's no good lesson out of it. Reading, it's violence, and it's a means to the end, and you're trying to end the other person. Violence isn't good. Violence will not change people's behavior. It will just end communication. That's really what it's all about. Meaning, even if you say you beat up the jerk who's in front of you or whatever, you're not going to change the way that person is. If they live through the encounter that you had and you better them and they walk away, they just won't do it around you anymore. They're not going to be that social jerk around you anymore. They're going to, but they're still that same person. So we try to tell people all the time, violence is a tool that's just, it's a very narrow tool that's only useful when you're devoid of choice, basically, because it doesn't provide for, any sort of social change that you're looking for. It's not very persuasive in the way that you want it to be persuasive. It's just it's when you look in, and that's why going back to the prison system, it's so interesting to look at that, because the credible threat of violence is really what keeps that whole prison society in check. And that's how they have to monitor themselves and everything. But it has to be a credible threat. And every so often it has to be unleashed, so people recognize, hey, don't think about making any changes here, right there. And that's really, when you look at it from that perspective, it's much easier to understand everything else that's going on in the normal world, in the civilian world, of what you have to pay attention to and what you don't have to pay attention to. And unfortunately, people, and unfortunately, a lot of people that get caught up in combat sports, they want to participate in the antisocial aggression. And then things go horribly wrong. Like the example I just gave of those two individuals, where the one guy got knocked down the stairs and killed over nothing. Really, it was just over nothing, and it didn't have to happen.
I think it's,
we don't have control. We don't have control. Once we put our hands on somebody, no matter what our intentions were, we don't have control of what the ultimate outcome could be, because we just entered the physical world, putting our hands on somebody, and there could be unintended consequences. The person could trip, fall back, hit their head on the curb, and now you've killed somebody when you had no intention of doing that.
I think it's a huge problem, actually, that you raise, in terms of, look, if I'm boxing and I've got my 14-ounce gloves on, and I engage that, and I've been doing that for a couple of years, and I know through my training that, okay, I punch somebody, and I have a certain expectation of what they're going to react and what they're going to be able to do. What's going to happen? What's going to be the result of me punching somebody? Because I've done it for hours upon hours upon hours in training, right? But I've been training for competitive sport. And if I have to use my skills on the street, and I haven't trained, and I haven't even thought about the outcome, I'm going to take my fist, my bare knuckle, I'm going to put it through somebody's face, like in the situation and they're going to fall down and crack their head on. I have unrealistic expectations of what violence are. And people talk about, okay, unrealistic techniques. But for me, that's not the only danger. The danger is if my expectation is that, okay, I punch somebody, they cover up, and they hit me back, and I knock them down, and excellent, I win. Or if my idea of violence is that it ends when I put somebody in a headlock in a guillotine show and they tap out, if that's what I'm expecting in violence, and then it's going to be completely different. From one aspect, is the obvious one that we talk about. Well, I haven't been, I didn't think about the option that I put somebody in a guillotine show and they reach into their belt line and grab out a knife and start making holes into me. That's one side of the equation. But the other side of the equation that's not talked about often enough is that I think that, I'm going to roll, I'm going to tap them out, we're going to high five, and that's the end of it. And it goes somewhere completely uncontrollable, where I wasn't even expecting. And maybe with the adrenaline, I choked them until they died. Or maybe, we just fell down together down a flight of stairs, and I ended up breaking their spine. And unless that's something that I think self-defense training gets right, is that we're under no illusions of what can be, or we should not be under any illusions of what can be the outcome for either side. That fighting is not fun. Fighting is dangerous, and at the end of the day, somebody is going to get really, really badly hurt. Where boxing is fun, Jiu Jitsu is fun, MMA training is fun. I mean, if that's the type of what you enjoy. And you know what? Self-defense training for somebody who's doing it for many years is also becomes fun. But we can't separate from the idea of that ultimately the realm of where we apply our skills is nothing, is the polar opposite. It's one of the worst things you could ever hope to find yourself in.
Yeah, and that's what you try to get across to people on that. It's not. I guess the analogy that I use to help people like wrap their heads around it is normally when I'm in a seminar, I'll ask everybody, hey, how many people here know how to swim? And usually, just about everybody, at least most of the ones that I do, most everybody puts their hand up. And I say, great. And I'll have my hand up too. And I go, okay, everybody that knows how to swim, how many of you have ever had to swim for your life? And usually there'll be one or two people that hold it up. I hold my hand. I've had to swim for my life a couple of times. And then I say to those people that are raising their hands, I say, okay, all of you that had to swim for your life, would you ever want to experience that again? And all the hands come down, because, and that's how I talk about violence. If you're willing to talk about, I did this, I did that. Well, you chose to use violence. You chose, and it worked out okay for you. You had some sort of a antisocial aggression situation, and you punched a guy a couple of times, and it worked out. He didn't die and got away, and you're the hero. It's on the other side. It's the people that are devoid of choice that have to use violence to survive. They truly understand that it's an event they never want to see happen in their life again, if possible. Same thing. I've dealt with a lot of my buddies who've seen some horrendous, combat, and it's you got to draw it out of them, and even when they've acted absolutely heroically, they still, they're just very methodical how they'll talk about it. You have to, keep pulling stuff out, because again, it's nothing they want to experience again.
It would be the equivalent of thinking that playing paintball is somehow similar or feels the same, is a similar experience to storming the beaches on bloody D-Day, or to be under barrage of mortars. Yes, maybe the mechanics are the same. In both situations, you're running around with rifles shooting at people who are trying to shoot at you, but that's about where it ends. And I think that's a pretty good analogy. A punch is a punch at the end of the day. But
right.
How many variations can you have, to close your fist and to build velocity and put it through somebody else's body? But the application is a million miles apart.
Yeah, no, it's very true. It's funny too. You get to a point in your training, as an instructor, and I think you evolve to that point to where you really realize that the thing I have to do as an instructor is, just because I'm evolved to this point. I wasn't in my 20s. I wasn't when I was learning this. I went through everything. And I was very lucky that some of the times when I did choose to respond with violence, that it worked out okay for me. That I didn't turn criminal. But what's interesting is I have to remember and put myself back in those shoes of being a lot of times it's younger men I have to deal with that are like this. And I try to walk them through. I try to give them a life or death experience without them having to actually go through it, to get them to change. All I care about is I just don't want them to glorify what they think. I want them to walk away with the idea you had no choice, you had to do this, but this is the work you had to do. And what's really interesting is it's easier for me to get that across for people when I start bringing in a lot of my prison examples. And I talk about that. I'm going to be doing an interview with one of the founding members of the Aryan Brotherhood. He just got out of prison, and he's, to really try to turn his life around and everything. But he's very methodical about violence and about how it attracts young men and what it does and everything. And we're going to have a really interesting discussion about that. It's to me, if I can help a young boy navigate the years 16 through 26, those seem to be the hot years. 26 seems to be a point that for most men, that 26, and it's not, I know guys well into their 40s that are just, ridiculous, but 26 seems to be that one thing. If you can get a kid to 26, they start to mature a little bit on things, and they start to, not be as impulsive as the younger males are. And to me, navigating those years with men is really an interesting challenge. And I find it really useful to do that, because unfortunately, that's where a lot of mistakes are made. A lot of, and actually well-meaning kids are good kids that just make a mistake. They respond with violence when they shouldn't, and they end up paying for it, in the prison system. It's just not, I think with a little education, you can save some of those types.
100%. Tim, it's been it's been absolutely amazing. We've been going for coming up to almost 3 hours, and I feel like we could go for a bit more, but I think this is a good point to put it to be continued for this. I will say that anybody who's looking to find you, Tim Larkin at Target Focus Training, your book "When Violence is the Answer" is on my must-read list for everybody who I train. You've been very active on Instagram recently. You've been analyzing and your commentary. I really enjoy watching you either break down situations and there's a lot of wealth of knowledge to be found over there. I'll put all the links at the bottom so anybody who wants to can find you. But Tim, yeah, it's been absolutely it's been an absolute pleasure.
Well, I really appreciate, you having me on and stuff. It's always nice when people from other disciplines, because I'm the same way. I love to learn from other people, but for you to have me on, with your level of what you do, I really appreciate it. And thanks for letting me, share some of my experiences. And if anybody has any questions or anything follow-ups on this, please let me know. I'll be more than happy to do this. And I hope I can reciprocate. I hope I can have you on my channel and we can have a discussion, because I'm sure there's more. We could have kept going. So this has been really enjoyable, and I look forward to the next one.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Tim. Thank you very much.
All the best.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, and if you're feeling especially generous, leave me a rating and a review. The full episode notes are available on ronengelman.com, where you'll find links to what we discussed today and information on how you can train with me and my team in Israel. Stay safe, stay healthy, please stay well, and I'll see you around.